Are you a forward thinker? Then you need an HR and finance platform that thinks like you do. Workday is the AI platform that helps propel your organization, your workforce, and your industry into the future. Workday, moving business forever forward.
Well, we were not prepared for this. The venue is full. However, the mission is bigger than the room. You can still join us. Due to the incredible uptake, our Responding to the Rebirth conference will now be live streamed. Book your online pass now at rebirthconference.net. You may not be in the room, but you can still be part of the response from anywhere in the world on Saturday, the 22nd of November. On the live stream, you'll get full access to all keynote sessions, panels and interviews with guests including John Lennox, Paul Kingsnorth, Elizabeth Oldfield and Al Gordon. You can take part in the Q&A. You'll get to take home recordings of all of the sessions and get a front row seat to what God is doing. A rebirth is happening. Let's respond together wherever we are. Book your live stream pass at rebirthconference.net.
So I turned up at a church and I waited and they did that bit at the end, if everyone wants prayer, come up. And I went and said well, can someone pray for me? I'm 5 days clean from cocaine addiction.
I think for me, when I feel closest to understanding of something of God, it's more in the kind of silence.
Right.
When I visit churches, I feel the sense of something else most powerfully when I'm just kind of sitting there.
Did the Lord ever tell you the meaning of the starry arrow?
Not yet. It's in me all the time. The thing for me for a while was, should I talk about it? And what I did feel that God said to me was, I gave you 18 months during lockdown. That was just for you. He says, what I gave you was a whisper. You now have to shed on the rooftops.
My son, a few months back, he said, Dad, do you have a spare copy of the Bible? He plays football, and a football team said, one of my mates in the team, it's his birthday, and I know he really wants a copy of the Bible.
We're in a stormy season, aren't we? For our nation, for our globe. Yeah. I think young people in particular, particularly coming out of COVID, we're seeing such a huge rise in mental health issues, deep questions of identity, that there is a need to hang on to something in the midst of all of that.
Hello and welcome to the surprising rebirth of Belief in God with me, Justin Brierley. It's a live show today and a real bumper edition as I bring you some of my onstage interviews from this year's Big Church Festival. The Big Church Festival took place at the end of August on the Wiston Estate in Sussex, England. It was the biggest ever crowd this year as 35,000 people came together to see amazing music acts across several stages on the site. But for the first time, the festival included a podcast stage, and I co-hosted that stage over 3 days with another podcast team from The Way UK. Now, they have a great video and podcast presence engaging Gen Z. Do check out The Way UK podcast to hear who they interviewed from the stage. But today, you're going to be hearing 3 of the interviews that I conducted as live editions of The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God. I'll tell you who my guests are in just a moment, but just before we get there, thanks for all those saying how much they've enjoyed recent editions of the show, including Chris Cox, who emailed me to say, I enjoyed episode 16 on the rebirth in music. It's really encouraging to hear about the faith experiences of well-known musicians and the way you too have navigated their music and beliefs. Is there any chance you could look into other artistic areas? I say this as I'm from an animation background, and the movie K-pop Demon Hunters has some very interesting Christian themes, and I've heard, although that needs verifying, that the directors and songwriter are Christians too. Thank you for the email, Chris. My young kids are actually into K-pop Demon Hunters as well, funnily enough. And your suggestion to find other areas of creative art that are seeing rebirth is also a great one. It's something I'm definitely going to explore more in the next season of the podcast, so look out for that. And that reminds me, if you'd like to see a next season of the podcast, then your support makes a huge difference. How can I help, Justin? I hear you asking. Well, one of the best ways is to become a monthly supporter of my work. Silver supporters get early access to new episodes as well as bonus content. Gold supporters also get signed copies of both my books and a monthly catch-up call with me. You can support from anywhere in the world via Patreon. And if you're in the USA, there's also a way to do it tax efficiently via our partner, Defenders Media. Anyway, if you'd like to support, the links are with the show notes. And again, thank you for helping me to produce more of these shows. Well, on to today's show, and we are going long, fitting in 3 of the onstage conversations from this year's Big Church Festival. One of the voices may be familiar to long-time listeners. Mythologist and storyteller Martin Shaw will be sharing again his story of adult conversion to Christianity and telling a few other stories along the way. You'll also hear my conversation with Andrew Ollerton and Andy Wolfe on the uptick in Bible interest and how it's being shared in creative new ways with young people. And each session also included audience Q&A, some great questions and all framed by the beautiful rolling hills and fields of the Whiston estate. But first we'll begin with my onstage conversation with author Lauren Windle on her addiction and recovery journey, alongside curious agnostic journalist Ben Sixsmith. And as you'll hear, this was live, and well, Ben got lost en route to the festival. I'm glad to say he does arrive slightly out of breath midway through our conversation and shares the most hilarious story of the ups and downs of his journey getting to us. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's show, Season 2, Episode 25, a live edition of the podcast from the Big Church Festival. Hi friends, have you heard about the new video series just out that responds to the rebirth in faith we're seeing in the West? The Encounter series is filmed across the globe, is beautifully produced, and is exactly what's needed at this time. Encounter explores the lives of people that Jesus met then and now, and is hosted by my friend Carl Fays. It was a pleasure to be interviewed on the series and to join other guests like Pete Gregg, Paul Kingsnorth, Martin Shaw, Heather Tomlinson, Mike Bird, and Lynn Cohick, all names you may recognise from the surprising rebirth of belief in God. If you're looking for a resource for today's cultural moment, can I recommend that you go to encounterseries.com.au. You won't be disappointed. That's encounterseries.com.au.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm delighted to be with you. I'm Justin. I host the Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God podcast. This is a live edition of that podcast. So you're all involved, and we'll do some questions towards the end of the session. But my very special guest is Lauren Windle. Lauren, welcome.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, round of applause for Lauren. Now, I should say, we may also have another guest joining us called Ben Sixsmith a little bit later. Sadly, he's been delayed getting to the Big Church Festival. So if he appears out of the blue, we will get another microphone and seat on stage so that he can join the conversation too. But I'm thrilled that you're here, Lauren.
Well, I'm going to do my best to make up for Ben's absence. So I'm going to bring everything.
You can try and channel a bit of Ben while you're here.
Yeah.
Let me introduce you officially, Lauren. You are a journalist, author, public speaker. You've written and spoken about your journey from drug addiction to recovery, and that goes alongside your Christian faith. You write a lot about making sense of faith and relationships as well.
Yeah.
So, and you've got a few books under your belt already.
Yeah, a couple, yeah.
So we'll maybe hear about that later. And I just wanted to use this time to explore something of your journey, what you're seeing. We just did a session here talking about a kind of what seems to be a new awakening to faith among especially younger generation. Mm-hmm. So maybe get your thoughts on that as well. Yeah. But I wonder if we could just start by you maybe just telling us, take as much time as you want, to, a little bit of your background and story and what led you to faith.
Yeah. So I was raised Christian in family where my mum had a faith, my dad didn't. And I have a feeling the thing about my dad's going to come a bit later because I've got some thoughts on that. But so my mum took me to church and continuously took me to church until I was about 13, when I was old enough to make the decision as to whether or not I wanted to keep going on my own. And actually my story of church when I was younger is very different to my sort of current experience at church. And actually what I saw were youth leaders going off with members, grooming members of their group. And the second they turned 16, leaving their wives and going off with them, and church leaders leaving their wives, members of the congregation, and Christian men being abusive towards, again, their wives, you know, and I remember someone having a black eye because they weren't sufficiently obedient. And I saw all of these things, and even in the sort of young people's like Sunday school group that I was a part of, I just didn't see a Christianity that I wanted anything to do with, and I felt very judged. I felt that everyone sort of led with shame. I saw Christianity as a set of a very simple set of rules. Don't have sex, don't take drugs, don't drink, don't smoke. And basically, if you're adhering to that, you're a good Christian. And if you're not, you're a bad Christian. And that was virtually the sort of the focus of the teaching that I was exposed to. And I remember just feeling like I was never good enough. I was never meeting up to these high walls that they're built around the church. I was always scorned. I was always shamed. I remember people telling me Christians don't dress like that. Christians don't do that. And I just thought, well, then I'm just not a Christian. So as soon as I was given the opportunity not to go to church, I took it. And in all honesty, it felt like a massive relief. You know, it felt like a freedom to not have to try and stand up to these ideals that I wasn't even sure I believed in, right? So I walked away, and I was like 13 at that point, and I loved the idea of God, but whatever I'd seen from Christians was not worth pushing through for. So that was me. And then, you know, in sort of South London where I grew up, drinking was a really big thing. We would have been like in the 2000s, sort of mid 2000s at this stage. It wasn't very hard to get hold of alcohol. They've really toughened up on the restrictions these days. But like as a 14-year-old, you could buy alcohol and things. And I was always quite socially anxious. I always felt, oh, hello.
I'm being attacked by a plant again. This happened in the last session. I was absolutely desperate. The reality is I was absolutely desperate for popularity with no guidebook as to how to get it or how to get it well. And I saw people who I perceived as being on the inside, and I always felt on the outside, and it felt like very high stakes in social situations. So I got naturally, with the pressure of that, very anxious. But alcohol felt like an excellent solution to that. So very quickly, to the extent that I could and I could afford to as a teenager, I started drinking, I would say alcoholically. So very much binging at every opportunity. And again, like in a very messed up way, that provided an element of temporary freedom for me. And I've heard people say before, you know, drinking wasn't my problem, it was my solution. And I absolutely relate to that. You know, it's not a good solution, but it's a solution. And I carried on doing that for years. And then eventually went through university, still drinking very heavily, got a job in hospitality, which is a real like work hard, play hard industry because it's long hours and you're all in it together and it's that kind of mentality, but completely surrounded by alcohol and then often later drugs. So someone offered me cocaine. And at this point I was drinking like four or 5 nights a week to the point of being drunk. And cocaine's a natural, I had no sort of moral guidelines that I was working towards that would say that that's a particularly bad idea. Lots of people I knew took drugs. Like, why not? So I did take cocaine. And things just got completely out of hand from then. Where, you know, alcohol as a solution is one that you can kid yourself about for like a really long time. You can always find someone who drinks more than you. Can always be like, John's at the pub every night, I'm fine, right? But when you're taking cocaine 3-4 times a week, you know, there's very few levels of regular drug use that you can say like, no, this is okay. This is like healthy, recreational. And that was it. Wow. I can see our other guest, Ben, is waiting in the wings. So we can, Ben, would you like to come and join the stage?
Ben.
Can we give a round of applause for Ben? You're joining us, as you can tell, in the middle of a very sort of exciting story of Lauren's journey. And
I'm a drug addict.
but we've got to kind of the middle bit of the story. We are going to, I want you to finish his story though, before we introduce Ben's, but welcome. Can we just give a round of applause for Ben Sixsmith? He's just flown in this morning from Poland. He has just been in a taxi, I'm guessing, Ben, to get here.
Actually, I've been walking over a large hill.
Okay. Well, anyway, you got here. Thank you so much. And we're going to hear your story in a moment. But Lauren, where did things go from here? And how did you end up, well, here, I suppose, at Church Festival?
Well, to take us all the way to sort of present day, the drug thing really spiraled, and what became an active choice became not an active choice, and something I was very much caged by and trapped within. And my ability to say no very quickly sort of left me. And I, for a few years, tried various different bits and pieces to try and sort of to try and moderate both my drinking and my drug taking, in the hope that, because I was still very young at this time, I'm like early 20s, in the hope that I could find like a level of partying that I deemed to be reasonable behavior. And I was just absolutely unable to moderate for any length of time. And eventually some friends sat me down and just said, like, we can't keep doing this with you. We can't go out with you for you to say it's going to be one drink and then see the night crumble around you and then have to have that conversation. Is anyone going to stay with her? Are we just going to walk away? What do we do? And then in the morning, you're just in tears and you're not seeing daylight, and we don't want this for you. You need to do something. So they basically gave me an ultimatum, like, we'll stand by you if you do something good for yourself, which was to go to a recovery group meeting, which I did on the 22nd of April, 2014. And I walked in thinking, this will be really fun, like funny, like not like, oh, here I am, I'm going to be confronted about my own behavior, like more like I've seen this on American TV shows.
You know how this works.
I'm going to tell this story at the pub. I went to one of those meetings, guys. Here's what actually happens behind closed doors. And actually what I found was a group of people who knew how I felt before I'd even said anything out loud, and such compassion. Wow. A room completely free of judgment, a space where you can say anything, and people will just they'll hold your hand, they'll cry with you, and I remember saying, like, can I moderate? Can I just stop taking drugs and carry on drinking? And one person there was like, I think you can, but she was 3 days sober, right? Whereas everyone else who was completely sober for months or years said, you know what, we're so sorry, we don't think you can. I think it's no mind-altering substances. So I made that decision, and that was 11 years and maybe 4 months ago, and I haven't drunk or used anything since then.
That is extraordinary. Yeah.
Thank you.
And that almost in a way serves as a celebration day for you every year, doesn't it?
Oh, I go big. Yeah, it's bigger than my birthday. It's a sobriety birthday. Yeah, it's massive. I've hosted pillow fights.
I've seen them.
I forced all of my friends to get up at 3 a.m. to go and watch the sunrise. Because as an addict, you see the sunrise all the time, but not for a good reason. It's because you've like done it again. You're still up. It's horrendous. So I was like, we're reclaiming the sunrise. It was
amazing.
Yeah.
Well, it's amazing to hear that aspect of your journey. Now we'll come back to you for the story of how the church story, because obviously you've told us that you were very much turned off to church, with your early experiences. We'll see what changed there. But welcome, Ben Sixsmith.
Thank you very much.
Great to have you. Yes. Well, I haven't given you a proper introduction yet. So let me say, Ben is a writer and editor at The Critic and elsewhere. His analysis of culture and political commentary comes from over the pond in Poland. I think that's where you're based most of the time, Ben. Ben, you're an agnostic, but I've always really enjoyed the way you write about faith and religion, even while not claiming a faith of your own. So I wonder, we're about to hear something of what took Lauren there. Could you tell us kind of what your background is with faith and where you are now on that journey?
So I grew up in a family of charismatic evangelicals, going to church, doing a lot of dancing and screaming, and going to Soul Survivor. So this is bringing a lot of memories back. Being here. It's a very nostalgic experience. But when I was a teenager, I was, like all teenagers, an expert on everything. So I decided that everything my parents had been telling me was completely and embarrassingly wrong. And I was the authority on all of these things. But then as you grow older, you have some more challenging experiences. I went through a period of depression, eating disorders. And when I got out the other side, I realized that maybe I'd not been quite the expert on life that I'd taken myself to be. So I started reassessing my ideas about existence, about the kind of existential reality of things. And I realized that maybe I hadn't been correct in going from a kind of certainty of belief to the certainty of non-belief, but there was actually a space in the middle to explore. And I'm still exploring that today, I guess.
Yeah, interesting. So what does that mean for you? Do you find yourself in church occasionally? Are you kind of more wrestling with these issues at a sort of theoretical level? How does it work?
So I'm very interested in the kind of, the risk of sounding pretentious, intellectual arguments for theism, about God's existence, about the nature of consciousness, or about the nature of kind of the historical facts or otherwise of the Bible. But I think that there's always a kind of more struggle with oneself, a kind of spiritual struggle, whether you mean that literally or metaphorically. I feel like I've actually had quite an agnostic day today.
Okay, what makes you say that? An agnostic day?
Any believer will know of the problem of evil.
Yes.
But I'd like to put forward a new theory, which I call the problem of British railways.
Okay, yes.
Which is how could an all-loving God possibly allow such a wretched system to exist?
It's the biggest question they've ever asked. Yeah.
It will test theologians for centuries. But I was meant to come down here on the train, but inevitably all trains were cancelled at Gatwick. I took a taxi, but I must have given him the wrong address. Because I got out of this cafe and I said, "Is there a festival here?" And they kind of pointed over the hill and they said, "Oh, it's somewhere over there." So I ran off up this hill, not knowing what.
You literally ran up a hill to get there.
I literally ran up a hill.
Amazing! Wow.
I got all the way up this hill and I got to the top of the hill, and I thought, what on earth am I going to see on the other side? I think it was 1:30 at this point. And so I look out over this hill, and finally at the bottom, I see all of these tents of the big church festival.
Well, something a bit biblical about
there
this.
is.
I guess agnosticism is kind of, you're climbing this hill, and you're hoping that on the other side you're going to find something.
Oh, welcome home.
Before it's too late.
That is a profound analogy, and one that probably also got you quite sweaty in the process of trying to get here. But well done. We'll talk a bit more about your search as well. Love to finish up your story. Not that anybody's story is finished, Lauren, but tell us sort of what was going on alongside this journey to recovery, how you encountered God along the way.
Yeah, I think it's hard, isn't it? Because I don't think of myself, particularly when I was using in those years, as someone who engaged that much with anything spiritual, but there were definitely times where I'd get really drunk and I'd pray. I remember once flicking through, I think I said this last time we spoke, I knew there was some sort of Christian TV channel on Freeview, all the way past Babe Station, well past anyone's watching. And I went to try and find it, thinking maybe there'll be something there for me. And I definitely came across it, but your mind's not really processing things particularly. You're not there to sort of concentrate and engage. But I can remember those moments, trying to sort of reach for something. And anytime I did reach for something greater than myself, my default was a Christian God, because it was the one I was introduced to as a child. And then I went to those recovery meetings, and it's a 12-step program. And part of the 12-step program is submitting to a higher power. And I don't dictate who that higher power is. It can be any number of things, the sort of set religions that we're all aware of. It could be for some people, they would say it's nature. Some people absolutely can't stretch to anything supernatural. So it's just that the power of a group of people collected together is stronger than their individual power. But whatever it is, it has to be a power that is greater than yourself, and it cannot be you. And they were like, go and get one, you know, work out what that is. You'll need that for this. That is going to become very important to you. So I like turned up at a church and I waited, and they did that bit like at the end, if everyone wants prayer, come up. And I went and said like, well, can someone pray for me? I'm 5 days clean from cocaine addiction. And it's like the moment that these American missionaries have been training for their like whole lives. They're like, get the handbook, Janet. It's just, yeah. And like laid hands on me and invited me to this women's Bible study. And I think what was most profound for me was at that women's Bible study, the pastor's wife obviously had quite a new group there. And she said, let's go around and just say something that we've seen in Christians that we like think is really special, that's attracted us to the Christian faith, that we've seen, that we really admire. And she went around the circle, and some of these women were like, oh, you know, they're just so generous, or like, I've just seen so much kindness. And that just wasn't my genuine experience. My experience was that they were really quite horrendous. And it got round to me, and I just felt like that like anger, and you're like, oh, I shouldn't be here. I bet these people have never even like sworn in their lives, and I'm here like a drug user, like about to absolutely blow up. And I just said like absolutely nothing I like about Christians, like not at all. And I said some of the stuff that I've said to you guys, and said that I was like beaten up in my church youth group, and I was like, I'm literally here despite what I've seen from Christianity, because I think there's something in the God thing. And Svika's wife just burst into tears, and she was like, I know that wasn't me personally, but I need you to know that I'm so sorry, and that is not my like understanding of the love of Jesus that you should have been shown, and I'm just begging you to give us another chance. And like I needed the apology so much more than I realized I did, and it really felt like a weight off. So I got really stuck into that church, and it like, I don't have some like lightning bolt, then the angel came and said this, or I just knew that. It was like slow, steady plodding towards something that increasingly made sense to me.
Yeah, wow. Ben, what do you make of Lauren's story, having heard a bit of it from the sidelines and now on stage? And I suppose, yeah, what obviously for Lauren, it was almost like that apology was the thing that kind of opened the door to God again. Is there anything kind of that you feel like you would need to kind of get to anything similar yourself?
I mean, I think that what Lauren is saying is that it got to a point where faith made emotional sense because of what you'd seen, but also because of getting this kind of weight lifted off your shoulders by this apology. I guess there could be a point where Christianity would make more emotional sense to me, but until you reach that point, it's hard to know what that would look like. Because if I knew what it would look like, I would have reached that point already, I suppose. I am coming at this from a slightly strange direction in as much as, in many ways, God does not make emotional sense to me.
That's interesting. What do you mean by that?
In as much as the weight of, or the scale of absurdity in existence feels so dramatic that I find it difficult to wrap it all in one kind of cohesive conceptual concept, which I know is a very abstract way of putting it, but I think that kind of, when I think about it, it doesn't strike me in that emotional terms. It strikes me in a strange kind of abstract term. What makes me more of an agnostic is that I think almost, despite how I feel, I think it's just very plausible that a God happens to exist. Because when I think about existence intellectually and what it would take to make sense of the origins of anything, or the existence of anything, or consciousness, or so many of these things that we take for granted daily, just in the level of pure kind of facts, it seems difficult to explain without recourse to the supernatural. So it's possible you can't cross that bridge without some level of emotional guidance.
I mean,
because
maybe you're not just someone who sort of the emotional side just isn't as important as perhaps it is for other people. Because from what you were saying earlier, you were raised in a quite charismatic tradition, but it just didn't connect. And inevitably, that's quite an emotional kind of way of engaging God. I just wonder, like, have you been more attracted as you've gone on in your journey to other forms of Christianity that are perhaps more intellectually kind of engaged, that sort of have more of that kind of part to them?
I think so. When I was at an evangelical church, I kind of would sit immersed in this music and this screaming and this dancing and these people falling over, and I would have a real sense, even when I was very young, of I must just be a terrible person. But I'm just sitting here and I don't want to do any of these things. To the point where I remember once at Soul Survivor, everyone was falling over, and I was like, well, you know, when in Rome, so I just kind of gradually flopped backwards. I think for me, when I feel closest to understanding of something of God, it's more in the kind of silence. Like when I visit churches, I feel the sense of something else most powerfully when I'm just kind of sitting there. There's a wonderful line in Philip Larkin's poem Church Going, where he says of a church, he says, "A serious house on serious earth it is, if only that so many dead lie round." And when you're surrounded by all of that kind of history of contemplation and ritual, that does strike me quite powerfully. So maybe that is a kind of...
That's maybe where something emotional happens, is more in the silence than in the swinging from the chandelier stuff. Yeah,
Indeed.
That's really interesting. Just before we got up on stage, I was chatting with Jesse and Xenia from The Way UK, two young Gen Z podcast hosts, and we were talking about the kind of the growing sort of awakening that seems to be happening, according to research, according to a lot of anecdotal data, among young people. I don't know if that's something you guys have encountered yourself, and whether you have any thoughts on, you know, given your own journey, Lauren, first, why we might be seeing, you know, other people waking up to the reality of church and the reality of God a little bit today.
It is interesting, and I definitely see more of an appetite and an acceptance and an openness to something beyond ourselves. I guess among the young people who are sort of in my sphere, that doesn't seem exclusively directed towards Christianity. And I guess given that I believe that it's the ultimate answer to that sort of ache, that longing, my hope is that in people sort of dabbling, they would find maybe emptiness in some of the other spiritual principles and practices that they dabble in, and then sort of settle on Christianity, which is certainly happening for some people, and I think that's brilliant. I guess when I reflect on it, something that definitely strikes me is that, and I said I might loop back to it. My dad's not Christian, so he's Irish Catholic, and left the church just absolutely full of resentment and anger towards the people who, in theory, were supposed to be caring for him and the people around him. And he was born in the 50s, very different time, and I think that his generation, and certainly partly my generation, which would be millennials, feel the weight and pain of the sort of power and institution of Christianity and Catholicism in his case, and the pain that caused because of the mistreatment of that power and the misdirection of it.
There's a lot of baggage that they're carrying. Yeah.
If you go to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting and you don't say higher power, and instead you say Jesus or church, someone will come up to you afterwards full of pain.
Right. Yeah.
They'll be in tears because they cannot relate to that level of God because they have been so hurt by it. And it has just, you can see the damage that it's done to so many people. I certainly feel that through the LGBTQ plus community. The whole idea of church is actually associated with pain, not with a homecoming, not with a place of safety, not with a sanctuary. And I think that actually some of that legacy is gone. Mm-hmm. I don't think that certainly Gen Alpha and a lot of Gen Z don't quite feel the same, feel that pain as acutely because there's just a bit of distance. So I think what we're seeing is there was a huge amount of pain. There was the hangover from that pain. And now there's this kind of like, okay, maybe we can explore this again.
let's hope and pray the church doesn't mess it up this time. That's the thing, I suppose, isn't it? Is will the church learn from its mistakes of the past in kind of, if there is a new openness, something new happening? Ben, from your point of view, I know you've written on and spoken with me for the Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God podcast about what I've called this surprising rebirth. What do you think is going on there at a cultural level? I just, love you to turn your culture mind to why we might be seeing an awakening in terms of religion after a long, very long dry period where things have been so very secular and atheistic for such a long time.
So very boringly, I do want to make the point that when people talk about the quiet revival, I think a lot of excited minds are going towards the revival word and missing the quiet word.
Okay.
I wrote a piece for The Critic called Just How Quiet is the Quiet Revival, where I questioned some of the statistics that were being raised by the Bible Society and others. But I think there has been some more data from other countries which suggests that at least something is happening.
Something's happening.
Even if we dispute the scale. I think there is some extent to which people who've been raised in a culture that placed a heavy emphasis on kind of certain fairly arid forms of individual achievement, whether that was based around educational accomplishments, professional accomplishments, or just kind of possessions. They are looking for something deeper and more meaningful and kind of deeper connections with other people. Obviously, people have come out of an era where changing family dynamics and changing technology has meant that a lot of people are quite alienated. We don't have such fixed roots with other people, either familially or with our friends. So they're looking for a kind of community as well. I think the challenge for Christians is going to be whether Christianity is seen as something we can kind of use and take from for ourselves, in the sense of people saying kind of, what can Christianity do for me? And whether that can turn into what can God do for me and what can I do for God? Because there's a big difference between seeing Christianity as something which is functional and seeing Christianity as something which is kind of sacred. I mean, obviously, Jordan Peterson was a major cultural figure, and he was not himself someone who explicitly believed in God.
For those who don't know the name, this is a sort of Canadian psychology professor who rose to fame as a sort of cultural influencer, very frequently talking about the value of God and the Bible, but not almost as a Christian himself, interested.
Absolutely. And there was also a very influential book by the historian Tom Holland called Dominion, which was talking about how Christianity kind of shaped Western culture. So I think there has been this renewed intellectual interest in what Christianity has achieved. But again, I think the challenge for Christians is going to be saying it's not just because we developed these interesting customs based on these very nice stories and aren't they wonderful and charming, but to say, well, actually, no, this isn't just Christianity. This isn't just religion. It's actually God.
Right. And the way I've heard it put is, some people seem to be trying to say, well, Christianity is kind of metaphorically true because it's so useful. But actually, the way to look at it is it's only useful if it's true. We might as well give up and go home if Christ has not been raised from the dead, as St. Paul said. It's no good sort of just looking for Christian culture if you don't have Christ at the center of it.
That idea that we're constantly looking for what God can do for us, I think is actually is hopefully something that we would be able to get out to people who aren't in the church. But first, we need to sort of address it within the church, because I don't know a preacher who doesn't have an application element to a sermon. It's all what you can take away for yourself.
Okay.
And actually, I don't believe that that's necessary. I think it's important and definitely has a place, but it shouldn't be 100% of the teaching that we're sharing, because the Bible in and of itself, regardless of what it can do for you, is phenomenal and is worth studying and understanding with or without application.
We should seek God because God is God, rather than because of what God can necessarily do for us.
And then the side dish is the amazing things that kind of happen for us. But I think that we kind of make that the main course.
Sometimes, lay it out the wrong way. Really helpful. Can we just give a round of applause to both Ben and Lauren? And we've got 10 minutes or so for some questions. So if you've been thinking about something, then please do feel free to raise your hand. Dan is going to be bringing around a roaming mic. I will just say at the outset, we're not looking for sermons or long statements. Just your question would be perfect, and we'll do our best to see what Ben and Lauren have to say in response. So, any hands? Anyone who would like to kick us off? It's always the moment when there's a slight nervousness, hesitation. Anyone? Okay, I can see a hand at the back. There we go. Let's start at the back, and I'm sure others will join in as we go.
Hi, thanks. I really enjoyed that. My question is to Lauren. When you encountered God, did you struggle with the change of social circles as well? Because obviously there's lots of change in your life. Did you have to change social circles as well?
Great question.
Yeah, so I'd done a geographical already, which is, I just left my city to go to a different city in order to not be around drug dealers, party people and stuff like that. So I'd kind of already made a decision that in order to have a better lifestyle, whatever that looks like, I was going to have to cut some people off. I would say that naturally, the people who wanted to spend time with me, just as the people I want to spend time with, changed quite a lot. And I think that that's probably okay. But did I struggle with it? I don't want to say that I did when I don't think I did, but it is something that people struggle with, particularly, any kind of big lifestyle change like that involves change that spills out into all things, changing the people, places, jobs. I changed my job. I left the industry altogether, and stuff like that was very painful. I had so much of my identity tied up in what I saw as quite a glamorous job. So to walk away from that when I'd made it, so much of who I was very painful. So in that sense, I definitely let go of things I was clinging on to. At that time, like that sort of first 3 months, when you look back on your life and what you've got is effectively like, it's a bin fire. You've also not gone through any kind of 12-step process. I didn't understand sort of God and the principles of the church and how that could support me. I hadn't had any therapy at that point. So you've got no tools and just a complete mess. It is miraculous that anyone makes it to a year sober. It is genuine miracle. When I see someone who comes over and says they're sober, what I see is a miracle. Wow. And it cannot be done alone.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. We'll go for another question. Do raise your hands if you've got a question. Just while people are thinking of that, and feel free to raise your hands, I wanted to ask Lauren, as a follow-up to that, did kind of the becoming a Christian mean that you sort of swapped out a circle of non-Christian friends for Christian ones? Because that's always a danger, I suppose, isn't it? That you kind of create a new kind of bubble.
Yeah, I actually didn't. So in moving city, I moved to a foreign country. I was in Paris. It's not that far. I made it sound really dramatic. It's just a train ride away. But so I did have friends in church, but they didn't become my social circle, everyday social circle. My social circle there was already pretty drug-free and very accepting, and of various different religions and things. So a bit different to my London life. It would have been very different if I'd stayed in London, in which case I would have had to make some quite dramatic changes and cutting out my sort of drug friends and putting in church friends probably would have worked quite effectively. But it was when I came back to London that I actually found sort of more church community.
Brilliant. Okay. Do we have a question? Yes, we have one here. Thanks. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. My question is to Ben. As an agnostic, do you see that as a journeying position towards either atheism or faith in any particular faith, but particularly in Christianity? Is it sustainable as a life thing to be agnostic?
Yes. Can you sit on the fence forever, I suppose?
Yeah, so there are different kinds of agnosticism. There's a hard agnosticism, which is where you think the existence of God is a question that cannot be answered. And then there's something that's called weak agnosticism, which I just hate the word for probably very insecure reasons. So I prefer to call it uncomfortable agnosticism, which is when you're actually actively trying to seek an answer. Mm-hmm. Because I think it is a question that I feel can be answered. And obviously, some people have answered it, whoever one ends up siding with.
Yeah.
Unless there's some conception of God which is completely beyond our imagination, someone is right. So my position right now is that someone is right, but I'm not sure who, and I hope to find out
So it sounds like Lauren wants to suggest an answer.
No, I wasn't actually going to suggest, and I just had a question for Ben. That's cool, right? We're all doing the Q&A. I was just wondering if because obviously you have a grid for what Christianity looks like because of your upbringing. Have you looked into some of the other sort of traditional religions that are practiced in the UK or in other places as well?
So I've lived in Poland for 12 years, so I've had a lot of exposure to Catholicism.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of respect for some of the rituals and a lot of the intellectual seriousness of the heritage, but I've never quite been drawn into the family yet, let's say. So it's a very something that's very interesting to me, but I've not crossed the threshold of belief.
I mean, I love the term you use, uncomfortable agnostic. Is it uncomfortable because you feel like you should be arriving somewhere on this question? You don't feel happy just staying in this position for the rest of your life?
No, absolutely. I mean, it's fundamentally so bizarre to exist that I really want to have a sense, not just of why in the sense of having some kind of meaning to my life, but in the sense of just knowing like how we actually got here. There's a very unpleasant film which I don't recommend watching called Old Boy. Where someone gets kidnapped and wakes up in a cell where he's kept for 12 years, and then he comes out and tries to find out who kidnapped him. And I kind of feel like existence is somewhat akin to that, except in a much more pleasant cell.
Finding out why you're here and who did this to you. I mean, I love...
born.
It is, yeah. Anyway, so much more I want to ask, but form an orderly queue afterwards to try and, persuade Ben, if you will, of where he should be searching. Great question, thank you. I think we've got time for just a couple more. So I see one hand at the back here, and we'll see what we can squeeze in.
I've got a question for Ben. I think the Catholic Church and traditional churches, it can be quite intimidating because there's so much, tradition and ritual and things like that. Have you ever thought about maybe cutting out not the idea of religion, but facing Christianity on a more of a relational basis? One of the strongest verses in the Bible for me is just to be still and know that I am God. And I think that's how I live in Christianity, is just I find my strongest relationship is when I'm still and just kind of connecting with God and just understanding and taking in everything around me. So not going into like a ritualistic type of religion. So yeah, had that ever like crossed my mind, instead of going down a religious point of view, maybe going down a personal and more relational point of view?
There could be truth to that. I very occasionally used to go to a Quaker church when I lived in London, and they would have this kind of long period of silence in their services, which I did enjoy. And I'm someone who very much enjoys walking. So often I will walk, especially late at night, into the kind of rural surroundings of my town. And it's a state that I very much enjoy and I find very healing and very thought-provoking. But I guess I haven't heard God calling out through that, or maybe I've just been listening to the wrong things. I don't know. So you absolutely could be right. But I guess I haven't.
Have you tried
on that stage
experimenting by sending up a prayer, and asking God, if you're there, let me know.
Hey.
Have you done it?
It's me.
Have you tried?
I definitely, when I was younger, I did. As an adult, no. Frankly, no. Maybe I should. I
don't know. I did a fascinating thing years ago with you're something of a philosophical type, Ben, and I did something with someone you may know, Tim Mawson, who's a philosopher in Oxford, and we created together something called the Atheist Prayer Experiment, and we challenged all the atheist listeners on my show to sign up to a kind of 40-day experiment where each of them would pray at least once every day for God to reveal himself to them. And there were some very surprising results in the process. But it's interesting because almost that challenge to kind of just try it almost on a scientific basis. A lot of people are very scientific in today's world. They want to think, but a lot of people have never tested the hypothesis. Well, if I asked if God's there, would I get a response? So I think it's worth doing. But
no, it's an interesting experiment. I should give it a go.
Yeah.
I've got so much respect for you coming to speak at a Christian
I know.
festival. Like, I rate that so highly, but
I've known Ben for a little while, and I knew he'd be up for this. So thank you, Ben.
It's the big church festival this week, and next week it's Gathering of the Juggalos.
Okay, right. Everyone welcome. Okay, one more, and then we'll give a final round of applause.
Oh, is that working? Okay. It's sort of a two-part question for both of you. But Lauren, I've had like a similar thing of like a transformation in my life as like before Jesus and after Jesus. And with like your sobriety and everything, I was wondering if you like prayed during your journey of that and if you see it as something from God. And then Ben, I was just wondering like how you view transformations in people's lives like that. Because with my friends that are like atheist or agnostic, I've had the most questions and talked with them about faith because of like my transformation. So I just sort of wondered how you view that, Lauren, and how you view that, Ben.
Yeah. What part does transformation play, I suppose, in helping people to approach the possibility of God?
You go first.
So I think from a kind of secular perspective, I think any time one's life does transform, it compels a kind of reassessment of things. Whenever you face something which just shakes up all your premises in life, you're forced to re-examine what you thought was true and what you thought was real. So when I recovered from anorexia, that was something I went through, just kind of thinking about what might have led me to that point and how I should be as a person going forwards. There is also, certainly when people recover from something which is very difficult to recover from, I mean, addiction especially, I know it's such a personal achievement, but I can imagine it could also be a compelling argument for faith in as much as it's often such an improbable thing. I mean, you were talking about the pessimism of the other people in the group. So obviously that's not something I've experienced myself, but I can definitely imagine it being something that one could experience because human nature is so sticky and it is so difficult also to escape our kind of environmental influences that when people do manage to transform their lives, there is something potentially miraculous to it.
Helpful, thank you.
Yeah, it's funny because sometimes people will come up to me after I've spoken in a church or something. They'll say like, "Oh, I like kind of feel sad that I don't have a big transformation story to my faith." But I think it makes it a lot easier for people to brush off. My non-Christian friends who I went to school with and stuff, they're like, "That's Lauren's thing. She needs it. She's so much better now. It's so good that she's found God." Like me, no, I wasn't an addict. And it's like, actually, I don't see that as a sort of prerequisite for access to faith or a reason to even start questioning. So in some ways, I think if I were to see myself as an evangelist, and that's a complicated term with, you know, all of those kinds of things, I think in many ways it's stacked against me because it's not most people's story. It's not relatable to a lot of people. I think that God and praying and being and having Jesus essential in my life was an absolutely vital part of my personal sobriety journey. Do I think you have to love Jesus to get sober? No, because there are loads of people who don't share my faith or have a different faith or have picked a different higher power who are sober, and I would never want to take that away from them. I wouldn't want to go back to that day and try again without the Jesus element. It has been such a central part of my life, and it became completely intrinsically linked with my sobriety in a way that I'm forever grateful for and indebted to both God, Christianity, the church, Jesus, and also the support of that community and those rooms and other addicts. Those two together became the bedrock of my life now. So I would always encourage someone to explore that because I know it worked for me and I have faith it would work for them. Does that mean it can't be done without? Like, no, of course, there are other ways.
Well, I am super grateful to both Ben and Lauren for joining us on the podcast stage. Can we give them a round of applause?
Hello, friends in the USA. I'm excited to be coming to speak in Florida and Alabama this fall. I'll be part of the Palm Beach Atlantic University's Apologetics Conference, Faithful Witness, running Friday the 24th and Saturday the 25th of October. I'll also be speaking at Spanish River Church, Boca Raton, the morning of Sunday the 26th of October, and then part of the lineup for a Ratio Christi conference at the University of North Florida on Monday, the 27th of October. Why belief in God makes sense. Finally, on Sunday, the 2nd of November, I'll be in Alabama, speaking at North Park Baptist Church, Trussville, in the morning, and then in the afternoon at Samford University's Tactical Faith Conference, alongside Martin Shaw, as we explore wild faith, the rebirth of belief in God, and the search for a better story. To keep up to date with future speaking engagements and events, subscribe to my newsletter at justinbrierley.com.
Wish you could become a morning person? You know the type, up before the sun, early morning runs, first one to the office with donuts and a smile. How do they do it? Easy. With the new Galaxy Watch 8, sleep tracking and personalized insights from Samsung Health help you improve so you can wake up to a whole new you. One who, dare I say it, skips the snooze? It's possible. Train your sleep with Galaxy Watch 8. Learn more at Samsung.com. Requires compatible Samsung Galaxy phone, Samsung Health app, and Samsung account.
The family that vacations together stays together. At least, that was the plan. Except now, the Dastardly desk clerk is saying he can't confirm your connecting rooms.
Wait, what?
That's right, ma'am. You have rooms 201 and 709.
No, we cannot be 5 floors away from our kids.
The doors have double locks. They'll be fine.
When you want connecting rooms confirmed before you arrive, it matters where you stay.
Welcome to Hilton. I see your connecting rooms are already confirmed.
Hilton, for the stay.
Welcome back to today's live special of the Surprising Rebirth podcast. Another of the guests to join me on the podcast stage at this year's Big Church Festival is someone who may be familiar to long-time listeners of this show. Martin Shaw is a mythologist, poet and storyteller, and he recently came to Christ in an unlikely adult conversion after a miraculous encounter in the woods. We'll explore that story again, and Martin's recent work seeking to rewild Christianity. And we jump in as I ask Martin to tell us about his background.
Maybe we could start with just a little bit of who you are. Mythologist and storyteller. Tell us, what is that? What does that look like in your life over the last few decades?
I think when you use a word like mythologist, you begin to feel like an endangered species. There aren't many of us left. But it is somebody that explores ancient stories, all their different layers, from cultural associations to how they feel inside your heart to, any number of layers. There's usually a PhD attached to the name, and I laboured at the coalface for 6 years to get it. But the other side of exploring old stories, of course, is telling them, letting them live in the jaw, and that's where the storyteller comes in. Storytelling is an extremely wide word, of course. It means any number of things, but I am what you would call an oral storyteller, a stand and deliver, get up, tell stories. I can tell stories for up to 5 days at a time, such as Homer's Odyssey, so don't ask for it or we're stuck.
I mean, how many stories do you think you've got back there in the memory banks?
There'd be a few hundred.
Wow, okay. Do they
curate your imagination carefully would be today's message. We live in a time where we almost have too many stories at our disposal, so I'm quite limited in what I allow in.
I like that. Well, you've traveled the world as a storyteller, as a mythologist, drawing upon many different cultures and traditions in that time. And I know that you sort of had a Christian background growing up, but it was something you effectively left behind in your adult years. And I guess assumed perhaps just wasn't for you for whatever reason. Can you tell us about that and how things changed just only a few years ago?
Certainly. I'm a product of an evangelical background, and I grew up at a place called Upton Vale Baptist Church in Torquay, and then later on I was at Stamford Free Church in Lincolnshire. And there are a lot of awfully positive things going on in those traditions. But what I was not really privy to at that age was a more contemplative dimension to Christianity that my soul really hungered for. I had no idea of the Desert Mothers or the Desert Fathers or any of that. It seemed, to be honest, a rather, and I mean this in a positive way, it was quite a sort of an urban experience. And there's nothing wrong at all with that. But I'm a rural character. I'm one of these bush characters. And so actually, by the time I got to 17, I needed to go on extended hiatus. I needed walkabout, because the truth was my dad, who was and is a preacher, when we'd be walking home from church, and it was church in those days, you got mighty sermons in the Baptist movement, but it was very sermon-led rather than liturgically. I had no real sense of communion. But on the way home with the pressure off, my dad couldn't help but tell me fairy tales. And that is when little Martin's ears pricked up. And I really wanted to know more about Robin Hood and especially Maid Marian than I did necessarily what I'd just heard in church.
That's really interesting. So you found once you were out, as it were, in the nature, in the wilds, that your imagination sort of took off at that point.
Yes, it felt uncorralled.
Yeah.
It felt connected.
Whereas the Christianity you'd been exposed to felt like it was lived within four walls and was sort of something you just had to receive didactically.
Yes. I mean, I knew enough I put it together that we worshipped a God that was born a fugitive and died an outlaw, that was a storyteller, less than a philosopher, was thin-skinned, troubled, disturbed in equal doses almost everybody he met whilst healing them. And I didn't understand how that kind of radical egalitarian could be the same figure that, to be honest, to me as a young punk rocker, seemed so anaesthetized within the church situations I was in.
So you spent a long time, as it were, outside, walking a very different path as you thought, 30 years or so. A lot of time up mountainsides and, with indigenous communities and sort of all these different experiences that you had. And I would say, in a sense, you were a very unlikely character to kind of be the person who would actually come back to church or some form of Christianity. And yet that is what happened. Do you want to kind of give us an overview of what happened?
Well, it never even entered my head. Why on earth would something seemingly as sort of something that felt like all the blood had been drained out of it centuries ago, why would I go near Christianity? The experiences I'd had were either, as I've just mentioned, heavy on the sermons or wild charismatic experiences. And what I needed, because essentially I'm introverted, was something that spoke to the deep interior. And I wasn't really having those encounters. So I went off and I studied the great myths and stories of culture. I learned to tell them. And just before we entered this century, I did something that's hard to do these days. I disappeared for 4 years. I lived in a tent on a succession of hills through the West Country of England. No screens, because screens weren't about. Some of you are old enough to remember this. There was no sacrifice involved. They weren't around. And so mercifully, I had this period of time where in my own mid-20s, slightly undirected way, I was still aspiring to have an encounter with what Paul would call, I suppose, the unknown God, the God of the romantics, because I was and am essentially a romantic character. But then suddenly you're not 20 anymore, you're not 30 anymore, you're not 40 anymore, you're about to hit 50. And I thought, well, hitting 50, what do I want to do to commemorate that? And I decided, believe it or not, to go on a 101-day vigil in a Dartmoor forest. There aren't many forests on Dartmoor, but there was one, 500 acres. Now, what does that mean to go on a vigil? It wasn't there that I wasn't there the whole time, but I'd go for several hours a day at dusk and be quiet and contemplate, be still and listen. And on the last night of this encounter, I was to stay up all night. There's actually the remains of an Iron Age fort in this forest. So I find my way up there. It's almost the end of the thing. I'm relieved. I've had a meal. I'm not fasting. I'm feeling fairly lively because the horror is almost over. And the horror, actually, when you do a vigil that long, is boredom. It's fine to do something for a few hours because you can thrive on peak experience. No one has a peak experience for 101 days. But what I didn't expect was what happened on the last night. So I'm there on my own, but I am praying in a rudimentary form. I always prayed. And it would have been something like this. I said, Creator, here I am. I'm only a small person. I'm at this cusp of entering my 50s. If there's any way you want to announce yourself to me, please do so. And I possibly imagined a stirring of the heart. But that wasn't what happened. What happened was, and I'd never done this before. I spent a lot of time in forests, but I'd never looked up. And I glanced up at the sky. It's about 1 o'clock in the morning. And I noticed there were many stars in the sky, these lovely pale blue colours. And as I looked up, I saw one star and I thought, isn't that interesting? It's a different colour. It wasn't the normal colour of a star at all. And as I looked, to my astonishment, the thing began to get bigger, like a falling star. But as I looked at it, emanating from the thing was a variety of colours. Now, you will probably be familiar. I've never seen the aurora borealis, but you know those kind of colours. It was a little bit like that. And I thought, well, that's astonishing. But what then happened is the thing picked up pace. And what I'm describing takes place over 20 seconds, but the effect of it will be emanating through me for the rest of my life. So I've asked this question, Creator, is there any way you want to show yourself to me? Suddenly, a star falls out of the sky. The thing gets bigger and becomes like a beautiful painted arrow. It's like that. And it just landed about 15 foot to my right. It was utterly silent, no sound. That's it. That's it. It wasn't a frightening experience. It was a glorious experience. And I remember even at the time thinking, this is like something out of the Old Testament. But that kind of stuff doesn't happen to you and me. It doesn't happen to modern people. Anyway, I stayed up all night. I did the vigil. The thing's finally over. I stagger back to my cottage. I'm getting into bed. Just as I'm closing my eyes, and I'm not privy to this kind of thing normally, I saw 9 words in front of me, and it said, inhabit the time and genesis of your original home.
Just do that again for us.
Inhabit the time and genesis, that's the tricky bit, of your original home. That's 5 years ago, and I've been puzzling over that for 5 years. What I didn't like about it at the time was this word Genesis. I didn't like that because it reminded me of the one spiritual practice I really didn't want to think about. Do you know what happened the next day? Freaking lockdown. Lockdown. If I'd coordinated better, I could have done all of this during COVID, but I didn't. I was then stuck for 1.5 years contemplating what had just happened in the cell that was at my cottage, and then through a series of dreams and Christ somehow sifting up to a point where I realized he was nearer than my own breath, I realized was having, Paul talks about falling into the mind of Christ. And over those 18 months, the combination of the experience of the star, various dreams and compulsions in my own heart showed me what was happening to me.
It's an extraordinary story, Martin. You were baptized. You found a home eventually in the Eastern Orthodox Church.
I did, yeah.
I don't know if that's why you got the amazing beard or that came before the Eastern Orthodox.
No, I've always had the beard.
You've always had...
Since I was 8.
There you go. But I know that you found something, you say it felt like coming home. Is how you described it to me.
It did.
But I think you discovered a part of the church that perhaps not been accessible to you before, but you found, there is a way in that isn't that sort of everything's about a sermon. It's more like a journey into the heart of God is how you've described your experience in the Orthodox liturgy.
There's a big word in Orthodoxy. It's called theosis, and that is the journey of all Christians to become, hopefully, more and more like the governor, to become more and more like Christ. But when I was younger, in my kind of circles, we would have just called that getting right with God. So you've got theosis on one side, getting right with God on the other, and the Irish would have another phrase, cop onto yourself. The copping onto yourself is a profoundly religious thing to do, because if you cop on to what makes a real true human being, I think you're moving towards what Christ was always talking about. Yeah. And so for me, being here in this environment, it's very heartening in all sorts of ways, but I'm just wired for quiet. Mm-hmm. I'm just wired for all of those. I'm a very, very ordinary mystic. Ordinary. And all Christians are mystic. You've got to be a mystic to sign up to something as mad as this.
I love it. I love it. I mean, you're still a storyteller.
Yeah.
And what I'd love to know is sort of, how did the story of Christ play into all those other stories that you had heard and told again, all the other traditions and spiritual, sort of ideologies and so on that you'd encountered in those 30 years? How did you make sense of this story coming into focus for you suddenly? The story that you thought you'd left behind as a teenager, how did it kind of land anew?
That's a brilliant question. He's the strangest of the gods. He's the strangest. He doesn't roll like the Olympians. He's not like Zeus. He's not even like Dionysus, which is a combination people often try to make. He is somebody that essentially, and this is a word that may not chime, but it's, if we had an hour, I'd expunge it. He's a shamanic character. Now, what does shaman mean? Shaman is an old Russian word that means one who is lit up from the inside. And a shaman is somebody usually who has suffered terribly for the sake of their community. So that's a reason why many indigenous cultures recognize Christ fairly quickly, because they say, oh, we know what this kind of character is. He's what they call a crocodile man. That's what my friend Malidoma Sameh. I used to work with a man from Burkina Faso, and you'd have crocodile men in his particular, in the Dagara tribe, men who had suffered particularly. So if you had a crocodile-sized question, you went to the crocodile man, because if you didn't, you got to talk to people that can sit where you've sat. So Jesus is this strange, he turns all of the traditional heroism on its head in the Sermon on the Mount, which is why I was so frightened of him. I'd much rather have a story like Beowulf or the Odyssey rolling around in my head. But Christ he can't even carry his own cross if you read the Gospels. He can't even, he's a different, nuanced, troublesome figure. You cannot draw Jesus with one line. You can't. Every time I read the Gospels, it seems like I'm reading about somebody else.
Right. Fascinating. So you found this, how did you kind of come to terms then, in a sense, with that character? I mean, part of your story almost reminds me of C.S. Lewis, a well-known Christian thinker of the 20th century, who obviously had his own adult conversion to Christian faith, and was in love with all of the mythologies and storytelling of the pagans and King Arthur and all of those legends and fairy tales. He found stirred his soul, and of course it was that famous walk around, the back of an Oxford college with J.R.R. Tolkien, where Tolkien, a committed Catholic himself, was able to say to him, "Well, what if all of those stories are actually pointing towards a true story, a true myth?" was the way that he put it. And that was a penny dropping moment for Lewis. I wondered if you had any sort of sense of, whether that resonates with you at all, that there's a sense in which those stories aren't, in a sense, false, but they might be pointing back or towards something in that way.
Yeah, I would be with Augustine when he says all truth is God's truth. So if you come across something that feels redemptive and powerful and life-shakingly challenging to you, you're probably in the presence of the real. And the kind of Christianity that I feel fed by, ironically, gives me more freedom, more imagination, more charity, more kindness to others. And I find God growingly more eccentric. So as we get old, it's our duty to be nutty old people. Just so we're clear on this. I love the eccentricity of God. And none of the other gods have a dog in the race like our one. No one else chucks their own child into the detritus of this fallen world and says, sorry, I'm using images that may not be familiar, I will make you a crow that sucks the sorrow out of this world in the most sublime act of love that people will still be puzzling on it 2,000 years ago. That is moving to me in my poetic heart. So I'll never quite know what to make of Jesus.
All I know is that when God came in human flesh, as mysterious and extraordinary as that is, he told stories.
Yeah.
And he left us words of incredible beauty and poetry that we still use in all kinds of ways today. How important for you is, in a sense, certain aspects of modern Christianity have lost storytelling, though, haven't they? And it's so ironic, given that Jesus was a storyteller first and foremost. What's going on there?
What's going on is something that is both very wonderful and a bit of a problem. It's called chapter and verse.
Okay.
That's the problem. I don't want to hear the first few lines of John being communicated to me in any other way than it's in the gospel. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, what that does is it inhibits your own imagination. Do remember that we've had Christianity knocking around these islands for about 1800 years. And I can assure you, it didn't arrive in scripted
in a leather-bound book with the red words of Jesus.
It arrived on the fiery tongues of charismatic storytellers. And if there's one thing I want to be involved in prophetically, it's a whole generation of people rediscovering the vitality and the wonder of Christian storytelling. It's dereliction of duty not to do it.
Absolutely. You've got a book on that subject coming out, and you've very kindly sent me an advance copy, and I've really been enjoying reading it this summer. But Liturgies of the Wild, it's coming out, I think, in February next year.
Yeah.
Tell us sort of what you're trying to get across in that, and if you've got a story to hand, you'd be very welcome to share one.
Blimey. Well, you know how long my stories are, so I don't want to put you through that unless you've.
It'll have to be one of the shorter ones.
Well, in these situations, you want to be an invitation, not an imposition. And you can turn into an imposition if you take advantage of the opportunity. The book, Liturgies of the Wild, Myths That Make Us, it's really a book saying that actually human beings get made slowly over time. And traditionally, we've always done that with stories. And so what I do during that book is each chapter is on an initiatory experience we're going to have. We're going to experience the monster of grief, or the monster of envy, or the monster of evil, and so each chapter I deal with stories and ideas that you can tell that handle the velocity of that particular encounter. So the whole book is mythically minded, but it's very rooted in the kind of lives that we live today.
Have you got a story up your sleeve?
Okay, I'll tell you a very simple story.
Go ahead.
5 minutes, tops. This is a story called The Half Girl. A long time ago in a village, there was a woman having a baby in a hut. And she was straining and straining and straining, and the doulas and the midwives were around her, and finally the baby was born. And ladies and gentlemen, I have great news. It was a little girl. I have a little girl. She's not little anymore. She's 20, but you know what I'm saying. It's a wonderful thing when little girls are born into this world. But as the girl grew, it was a very strange thing. She realized there was only half of her. She had a very delicate right ear, right shoulder, right elbow, right foot. But she realized that this other half, the left half, was missing. Now, when she looked round at the other kids in the village, they were completely compact in themselves. They had a left side, they had a right side. And she started to ask everybody, where is this other side of me? Part of me is missing. She never got a convincing answer. Now she gets to adolescence. She gets to that moment that separates being a young girl from a young woman, and she decides to leave the village with her question. Sadly, on the day she leaves, nobody tries to stop her. I don't know if you can remember being a teenager. I don't know if you ever had a question that you need answering at that age. But the girl goes out into the world, and the story says she traveled for 4 days and nights. Now, when you hear that in a little story, that could be a decade in our time. So she wanders, but it's hard being in this world when there's only half of you. She has kind of half-hearted relationships. She has a half-hearted relationship to work. I know that feeling. But finally, there comes a day, it's very hot, it's a bit like this summer, and she can hear a sound up ahead. It's the roaring of a river. And she thinks, well, I'll just go and sit by that river and cool myself down. Now, as she's by that river, we call it the sacred river, she sees the thing she's longed to see her whole life. Coming down the beach towards her is another half girl. Who knew? Who knew that out in the world, there's someone with the other side? Don't ask me why this happens, but this is what happens. They don't embrace each other. They don't say kind words to each other. They kind of circle each other, snarl at each other, spit in the dust, and I'm afraid they got into a bit of slap. They got into a big scrap, and they fall fighting into that deep, profound river. For 15 minutes, no more, no less, they were not seen. Occasionally a hand came up and then down, until finally, you with me? Finally, one young woman crawled out onto the beach. Now, she's not looking her best. I'm going to, you're not looking your best when you've had a wrestle in a sacred river. She's got one eye going one way, one eye going the other. She's got a bit of a Medusa look going with the curls, drip, drip, drip. But it's one woman. Now, when you have been wrestling in a sacred river, the clue is you don't remember how this happened or how you fell in. So she starts wandering around, and she wanders for many days again, until up ahead, she sees a village, almost finished. And at the edge of the village, there's an old man and an old woman. All we know about them is that they're wearing blue clothes. And they are smiling at her quite delightedly. The old woman is hopping from foot to foot. And the young girl says, "Can you tell me where I am? I have no idea." And the old woman says to her, "Beloved daughter, do you not remember the village that you grew up in? Have you not realized yet that all the girls in the village are half girls inside their hearts? Have you not realized yet that all the boys in the village are half boys, until they have to go far out into this world to find the part of themselves that the village cannot give? When they fall into the river of divine trouble, and they wrestle like Jacob with the angel. They wrestle like Jacob with the angel until they find that other part of themselves. And now you have found that, we can start to dance. And with that, musicians are turning up and kids are turning up and they're jumping up and down on the girl and they're weeping and they're giving her all the infusion of love she needed when she was younger. And they drag her back into the village. My goodness me, the celebration that went on. It was so wild, they say it took 7 men working 7 days just to stir the mustard at that celebration. People danced, they fell in love. Everyone was in love, even the long married. Everyone went to sleep. They got up again. They did it again and again and again and again. And then when all of that had finished, the full woman that had once been the half girl sat in the middle of the village and she started to tell all those stories that didn't make sense when she was younger, suddenly had become a great symphony inside her own heart. And for the rest of her life, she was the first storyteller in that village. And when she died, they say truly, a tree grew exactly where she used to tell the stories. And from then on, all the storytellers since in that village sit when the day is hot under that tree and receive the medicinal nutrients of story. That is the story of the half girl. So there you go. Thank you.
Wow.
We are all half girls. We're all half boys. See if you can find someone in the next 5 days and tell that story to them. Hold on to it, because when you tell it, something will happen. There'll be some vivacity in it, some weird spark of imagining that's not there in my telling. Beautiful thing, eh?
We're going to go to Q&A in just a moment. So be thinking of what question you would like to ask Martin. It might be around storytelling. It might be around his own journey. It might be around a question you have around faith that Martin might be able to speak into. So we're going to come to those in just a moment. My final question before we do that, Martin, is a story like that you've just told, what does that do to us that sort of, I don't know, a sermon doesn't do? How, and are we, you know, in the Gospels, when Jesus told parables, he sometimes just left them there hanging.
Yeah, I did.
Sometimes his disciples came to him after and said, "Can you explain this to us?" And he maybe explained something. What do we do with the story? Do we let it just sit? Or do we sort of go and analyze it? What's your recommendation?
Don't tell the story what it is.
Okay.
That's the key. Court the story, trail the story, don't trap the story, because these stories will get hurt feelings and they'll bugger off. They don't want to be stretched on the rack of allegory all the time. That's the trouble. When people come to me and they say, "I've got this problem and I need a story to illustrate the problem." No. Let the story prowl around the room. Otherwise, here's a big idea. You're not working with a wild animal. You're working with a pelt, pretending it's a wild animal. Those are the books that sell 1 million copies, by the way.
Okay.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
So, leave space. I was talking to a man called Mark Vernon, who you would know. Mark Vernon has an idea. It's only an idea, but it's a lovely one. He says, I'm sure part of Jesus's parables were designed to give people nervous breakdowns. He's designed to sort of turn you round and around, and he doesn't come. Yeah. He's very rarely obvious.
He very rarely answers anyone's question straight either. He tells a story or he asks a question back. Is typical Jesus. So, right. Well, we've got some time for questions. So I wonder, have we got any hands? I'm looking for hands. I can see a couple in the middle here where we could begin. Dan, thank you very much. I will just ask you to keep your questions as short as you can, and hand the mic back after you've asked it. Thank you.
Hi, Martin. Hi, Justin. Loved listening to this. So, Martin, I'm just wondering, do you do any kind of events where you take a load of people out onto the wilderness or the Dartmoor Hills, and you sit around and you do a meditative journey together and tell stories and that kind of thing? And if you don't, why not?
Luckily, the aggression in your question, I can immediately counter. Yes, for 21 years, I've done nothing but that. Go online, Dr. Martin Shaw, and you'll come across the School of Myth. I have many programs and courses you can do, but I also do something called the Peregrini Sit. Now, I believe you've just signed up for it in that question, which is a 4-day and night fast in a wild place where you will get as many stories from me as you could possibly want, but then you will sit like Anthony of the Desert with your ass on a hill for 4 days and nights and listen for that still small voice. So yes, there's a ton of that going on. I love that work.
There you go. Brilliant. You signed up by the sound of it.
You did, yeah.
You got yourself a 4-day fast. Okay, we've got another question behind, but also one here. Yeah, let's go for it.
Did the Lord ever tell you the meaning of the starry arrow?
Not yet. I think I probably... It's in me all the time. It's in me all the time. Now, the thing for me for a while was, should I talk about it? Should I talk about it? And what I did feel that God said to me was, I gave you 18 months during lockdown. That was just for you. But if you look at the Gospel of Matthew, there's a certain point, I think it's in Matthew, where he says, what I gave you was a whisper. You now have to shed on the rooftops. So actually, whilst those things remain mysterious to me, what I do know is I had a moment where they were for me to gestate and land, and then I had to communicate them.
I mean, if I could follow up with that, how does it get received? Because you talk to a lot of people, not just Christian audiences, which might be quite open to the miraculous, but maybe people who are maybe a little bit more skeptical about all this stuff. Do they raise an inquisitive eyebrow and say maybe it was something you were smoking that night, Martin? Is there a kind of...
You'd think.
Yeah.
You'd think. No. I don't understand why I seem protected in some fashion.
Wow.
That people may say that's not for me, or that's signs and wonders. I don't want to know about that, But no, weirdly, there's been no cynicism about it. There's just been disappointment.
Disappointment.
Yeah, that's what I'm on the receiving end of all of the time. Is I'm not angry. I'm just profoundly disappointed with your life.
Explain that a bit more. Who's disappointed in this journey?
People would be, I had a lively life long before this happened, and for some folk, because Christianity is it's so lit Catholic in the best sense of the word, it's so eclectic, people thought that I had sort of signed up to a kind of Donald Trump vision of the world, and many of my friends in indigenous communities would see certain elements of Christianity as essentially colonial. Right. And so that would seem backwards in comparison to the kind of relationships and the way that I'd been thinking and talking for 25 years.
So you lost some friends?
I did,
in the process?
yeah. You know what, Jesus says, come find out. And he doesn't say, come find out, and all insurance policies will be put in place and all will be well. He says, this is going to be extraordinarily tough, and there's a narrow gate. And I knew that. I knew the memo through my own family and my parents before I did this.
Yeah. Another question. I think we've got one at the back here.
Yes, hello. Thank you very much for this time enjoying ourselves. Thank you very much. There's this theory called the death of the author. In your last words, we were talking about the story that had to be alive, that you had to should not contain it in a certain interpretation. And in the death of the author theory, it's a bit. I wonder if it's a bit the same thing, where the author and what he's trying to say in his art, it doesn't matter anymore, and you have to let his creation lives by itself, and it seems a bit in contradiction with what the Bible tries to be a message from an author that is trying to tell us something. So I wonder what do you think about this theory of death of the author?
Wow.
There's a poet called Keats, and Keats says to be a grown-up, you have to live in something called negative capability. And negative capability means paradox. And so your question is a question of paradox, really, because all Christians are in service to something that has a clear message that is much mightier than them. However, God has always used charismatic people, always. And that means you have opinions and moments, and sometimes you get things right, and sometimes you get things wrong. So what I had to do with the peculiar little skill set I have, which is not very big, but I have it, is to present as cleanly as I could what I thought I had been bequeathed to deliver. But once you've done that, which is what you're getting at, there's two things. One is you hope the Holy Spirit lives in that work and gets to work on other people. And then if they have a profound interest in the Christian journey, I would point them towards the seasoned professionals.
Thank you very much for the question. I can see another hand here, and
seeing the answers to climate change and a lot of things going on in the world with indigenous knowledge. I just wondered whether there's a way of sharing everything you've been saying about or exposing indigenous.
I think I got the gist of that. The microphone was cutting in and out a bit, but is there anything, yes, from all the stories from those indigenous communities that you gathered, and given some of the challenges we're facing around climate change and, global issues, that you could helpfully bring to your new audiences, Martin?
I could, and of course I would, before I did any of that, I'd say go to those cultures. We don't need me as interpreting them. You would be going to indigenous cultures around the world. So yes, those stories are filled with ecological information, because the old indigenous idea is that the world that God created thinks in myth. The cormorant thinks in the way that it thinks. The river thinks in the way that it thinks. The mountain does. Now, that doesn't mean I'm not animistic in the pagan sense of the word. I'm pantheistic in the orthodox sense of the word. In other words, God inhabits this world. He inhabits rocks and minerals and plants, but he also has one foot outside the universe as well, which is a brain melter, let's be honest. What I would like to say in response to it is, if you are a Christian and you're interested in stories that have a particular ecological awareness, we have an enormous treasury of them in the saint stories, particularly of Ireland and the Celtic world. They're filled with reverence for nature. They talk across the hedge and across species all of the time. And I was not very privy to that. Also, there's a little book called The Green Bible that you can get. I can't remember who authored it, but all references to ecology and the state of things that are in the Bible are in this book. And when you get to them, they're in green.
Reading your forthcoming book, you referenced a book that I hadn't come across, but I think it's due to be released soon. I think it's called The First Nations Bible.
Oh, yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. There's a new, I think it's the whole Bible. There is a First Nations telling of the Bible. You'll recognize the stories immediately. There's been no whittling with the stories. But for example, Jacob would be called heel grabber. So you just it rehydrates. Because that's what we need. We don't, I think, necessarily need tons of new stories, but we need more inventiveness and playfulness in a way around the way we tell these old stories. And so this wonderful book, it's out.
Yes.
It's out, but very recently, that you should read. It's a First Nations version of the New Testament, and it'll just rearrange your head a bit. It'll be like you're hearing the stories for the first time again. What I'm trying to do in my own work is build up an entire, almost like, a prayer rope or a rosary. I have a kind of prayer rope of stories from Genesis through to Revelation, and each one of them is a story that I kind of lovingly sit with and now tell, just like I told the half-girl story. And if you want to join me, come to Walsingham on November the 15th, where I'm leading a pilgrimage. It costs nothing, come and join. Paul Kingsnorth is coming.
Wonderful.
And people are coming, and they're not just Orthodox, they're not just Catholic. Anybody with a longing for a deeper life should come.
Wonderful, wonderful stuff. We might have time for maybe one more. Have we got another question?
I can see a hand there.
I see a hand back here, Dan, and we'll make that our final question. Wonderful questions, everyone. Thank you very much.
What drew you to Eastern Orthodox Church?
Great, thank you.
Well, I spoke to Justin about this once. I did the rounds. I was baptized in the River Dart by a wonderful man called Peter Owen Jones, who's part goat, part priest. He's just my kind of thing. He came in to talk to all my furious...
The plants have gone down in the spirit. The spirit is here, moving.
Just roll with it.
Yeah,
just roll with it.
It's all good. Just let them lie there.
Yeah.
They're fine.
Peter Owen Jones, more goat than priest. He turned up and he said to all my astonished pagan friends, he said, Christianity is a wilderness religion. And everyone went, oh, I'm feeling weird. But in a good way. Weird good. And so we splashed out into the river, him and my dear dad. But this is the thing. In my father's house, there are many rooms. For which room is a degenerate like me going to go into? Of sinners, I am the first. So I tried the Baptists, and I really liked the Baptists, and I tried the Catholics, really liked the Catholics, went here, there, and everywhere. And then one day I was in a shopping centre. It was on a Sunday. And next to all the shops that were selling vapes and pornography, there was a tiny little Anglo-Saxon church. And I just walked into the middle of something called Divine Liturgy. It's our version of communion. And I entered a very profound experience of heaven and earth joining. It lasts for a couple of hours, and it just immediately delivered to my mystical heart absolutely everything that I needed. Orthodoxy is a peculiar mixture of formality and total anarchy. And I really like that. We don't rehearse much in Orthodoxy. We don't get together on a Tuesday and go, so let's go through the songs. Is Audrey, are you here? No, we don't do any of that. We're in. And I like the austerity. I like the fact that it says we live in a culture that is addicted to feasting and knows nothing about fasting. I like the fact that somebody as sensual as myself needs a course corrective every now and then. I'm a believer in making a covenant with limit, and Orthodoxy has helped me make a covenant with limit. But I want to speak specifically to the strange eccentrics amongst you who, from a distance, Orthodoxy can look a little severe. Or, and this is a travesty, people say, where are the women? Where are the women? Good Lord, go into any Orthodox church for 5 seconds. You'll find out where the women are. You'll find out where the women are. They're everywhere. And in fact, a divine liturgy, most of our theology is sung. It's sung. It's not a priest at the front giving homily after homily. And what are the voices that you hear singing? You're hearing women's voices. You're hearing a back and forth between men and women all the way through. But we are all in service to something mightier than our own gender at that moment.
There you go. I've heard you describe it as the Orthodox liturgy is a runway for the Holy Spirit. Yeah, I love that metaphor. Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing so candidly your story and some stories from the backlog of stories you've got in the mind there, Martin.
Thank you.
Can we give a round of applause to Martin Shaw?
Thank you very much.
Big news. Sephora is now on Uber Eats. So if you find yourself facing a beauty emergency, like needing a last-minute gift, or you're just out of your favorite mascara, again, don't panic. We got you. Order now and get $10 off on Sephora orders of $50 or more on the Uber Eats app. Order now. Offer ends October 30th. One order per customer. Additional terms apply. See app for availability. Delivery fees may apply.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Don't chew on that, Max.
Cooper loves that chew too.
Oh, now he's into Cooper's food. Wow, he is loving it. What do you feed Cooper?
Blue Buffalo Life Protection Formula. He never leaves a crumb. I love it because it's made with high-quality protein, nutrient-rich fruits and veggies, and wholesome whole grains.
Looks like we're switching to Blue.
Blue Buffalo foods are made with the superior ingredients your dog needs to thrive. Can your dog food say that? Visit feedbluefood.com to learn more.
Welcome back to the final part of today's live show, going long by squeezing in 3 of the onstage interviews from our Big Church Festival podcast stage this past summer. You can find links to all the guests, by the way, from today's show with the podcast info. And we've also put Martin Shaw's interview up on our YouTube channel. Well, my final guests today are Andrew Ollerton and Andy Wolfe. Andy Wolfe is the Executive Director of Education for the Church of England, leading on faith-based school leadership. Andrew Ollerton of the Bible Society is creator of the Bible course and author of the recently released God's Book, an honest look at the Bible's 7 toughest topics. I was glad to actually write an endorsement for that book ahead of its release. It's really worth getting hold of. Anyway, Andy and Andrew joined me to tell some inspiring stories of faith being shared outside the walls of church and to talk about why Bible sales are on the rise. So we'll jump in as Andrew Ollerton responds to my opening question about why the Bible seems to be making a comeback in Western culture.
I think that the Bible is, maybe some of the sort of nominal Christianity, people feeling of our generation, they thought they knew what the Bible was. They'd had it pushed at them a little bit and they didn't want any more to do with it. That is giving way to it. Their children are growing up. They didn't give any of the Bible to their children. So their children are growing up, not with a sort of a hostility or a contempt, but with a curiosity. They don't know what it is at all. So there's very low literacy rates when it comes to the Bible, but there's curiosity. Literacy's down, curiosity's right up, isn't it? And so my son, just the other day, a few months back, he said, Dad, do you have a spare copy of the Bible? I said, come on, son. I work for Bible Society. Of course I do. But why do you need that? I knew you had plenty. And he said, well, he plays football and a football team. So one of my mates in the team, it's his birthday. And I know he really wants a copy of the Bible. So my son then sort of wrapped up this Bible in traditional birthday wrapping paper as if it's a gift, because it is.
Yeah.
And yet I think for many of us, it's this wake up to actually the Bible that many of us have thought, people think, that is old fashioned or even controversial. For a lot of people today, I think younger generations especially, it's a gift that they would actually like to understand. So one of the things, I work with Bible Society, the Quiet Revival research has shown not only have Bible engagement levels gone up in the church, what I was really interested in, the research showed that for young people, 18s to 30s, outside the church, about 35% of them say they would like to understand the Bible for themselves. So there is this new hunger, which is quite surprising.
I wonder, Andy, if you've got any idea where that hunger is coming from and what you're seeing kind of in the school circles that you move in.
I think that in a world that is increasingly confusing, fragmented and polarized, there's something about leaning into stories and truth that is much more historical. I think there's something reliable about that. I think there's something, we're in a stormy season, aren't we? For our nation, for our globe. Yeah. There's something about leaning into that. There's something about, I think young people in particular, particularly coming out of COVID, we're seeing such a huge rise in mental health issues, deep questions of identity. whether it be children in primary schools or secondary schools, those moving into college or university, that there is a need to hang on to something in the midst of all of that. And I think that that it won't be for everybody. It's not like the entire nation is saying, well, my entire self-identity is now based on reading the Christian scriptures. But we're seeing that the more that you normalize talking about that, particularly in a school context, the more there's respect for it. There's a desire to debate it. There's a desire to engage with it. And if you can identify with real themes that you're experiencing in your life and you see them in the text, rather than a sense of sort of religiosity that sets a standard that you can never get to, I guess. I think that's why young people kind of pretty interested. If you can see yourself in the text, then you're interested in the text, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, going back to when you were a youngster, teenager, Andrew, can you remember what your relationship with the Bible was? Did it come alive at some point for you? Was it kind of a bit of a difficult book to dig into?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was fortunate to grow up in a Christian home, so I'm really grateful to parents. Amazing the job that parents do and grandparents as well in raising kids to understand the Bible. So for me, it was normal. It was part of the family. But I think for reasons I just alluded to, I was never wanting to be seen with the Bible with my friends. I had a very shy relationship in terms of my faith. So I was, a Sunday Christian. My Bible stayed at home. And then in terms of my sort of friendships, I was hiding away a little bit. But I remember a particular challenge that I was on a beach and I started speaking to someone. I don't know how we got into the conversation, but we started talking about the Bible. And this other person was very hostile, an atheist, and they said, the Bible's full of contradictions. And I said, no, it isn't. And he said, yes, it is. And I said, no, it isn't. And this sort of Punch and Judy show. Eventually he said, well, have you read it? And he obviously saw a little hesitation in my response because I'd had bits of it read, but I couldn't say I'd read the whole thing. So have you read all of it? And I had to admit that I hadn't. And that was the end of that conversation. He felt he won. And yet for me, that triggered a kind of, if I'm going to start saying that I believe the Bible, I need to have read it. And so I actually, not always recommending this, but I started in Genesis and I read my way through to Revelation. And I think that actually forged my relationship with the Bible, just reading the text. And some of that was tough. I remember bits of the Bible that I really felt troubled by. But in answering that guy, I never got to speak to that guy again, but in answering his response, I was actually struck by how compelling the Bible is, how much coherence there is, something that spans centuries and so many multiple authors. What struck me was its harmony. And that really set me on a journey. And I think, I still had intellectual struggles at university. There are still parts of the Bible that I struggle with and wrestle with. But I think that was, it's interesting how sometimes you have to have a bit of almost intellectual humbling that triggers a journey and a deeper engagement. And that was good for me.
I know that your next book actually is the fruits of that struggle. It's called God's Book. And it's, I think, answering the 7 toughest questions about the Bible.
Yeah. So I'm bringing this one out. It's coming out in September. And it's really the book I wish I'd read. If I'm very honest, the book I wish I'd read when I was younger. And really what I'm doing, I'm trying to stay in my lane because I've done a lot of help people see the big story of Scripture. So I'm going through the Bible, Genesis to Revelation, but looking at the 7 from Genesis and the creation stories, the question of how do we reconcile those with science, moving through the Bible story, the laws of Moses and laws about holding slaves and the violence and the warfare, especially the conquest of Canaan and suffering and the miracles of Jesus and the teachings of Paul on sexuality and then Revelation and the kind of heaven and hell. So I'm trying to go Genesis to Revelation, but looking at all of the things. And one of the reasons for that is because, again, Quiet Revival research interestingly showed, as well as the real positive headlines, there were some challenges buried away in there. One of them is that 35% of young people in the church say that reading certain parts of the Bible undermines their faith. And I resonate. I can understand where that's coming from. With our modern sensibilities, the way we've been trained by culture, there are just some parts of the Bible that are difficult to understand. And what I don't want is for people to almost sort of begin this great journey and feel stuck and feel that actually they can't trust the things in the Bible. So I wanted to provide this kind of guide that journeys through, and I hope it does that.
Yeah, brilliant. We'll look out for that. Andy, where did your journey with the Bible begin? And how's that developed, I suppose?
Do you know, talking about your childhood's taken, I don't know if anyone had this experience, but you've taken me back to my year 7 welcome assembly. It wasn't called year 7 in those days, of course. And we were all given a Bible by an organization called the Gideons. Just raise your hand if you got a red Bible when you were, right. Isn't that amazing? You know, you know, I also grew up in a Christian home. I was kind of pleased to be given that on that day, but looking around down my row, I was not feeling like I was in the majority at all. And many of them perhaps weren't taken good care of by my peers, if I could put it like that.
The pages were perfect for rolling spliffs. That was something that some people I knew ended up using their Gideon Bibles for.
Wow.
Yeah.
They didn't cover that in the assembly, actually. But if there are any teachers out there who'd like to kind of develop that resource with me, I'm sure that would get us all into a lot of trouble. But my overarching memory of that was the bit, not the text actually, but the bit at the back, or at the front, I forget, but where it would give you like, if you're feeling worried or if you're facing this, or does everyone remember that? And sometimes you're not really supposed to use the Bible in that way, and it's a sort of like look up your favorite verse just to make you feel better. You know, that isn't the only thing to do with the text, but it just strikes me that, you know, those weren't made up ideas. They're actually, there's a text there for you when you're facing your darkest moment, where you feel you don't quite know how you relate to your peers, where you're not quite sure how you fit in, where you where you actually have more questions than answers. And, you know, I think that sort of that academic sense of like, you must learn it, or you must like have one view about the text, or we must argue until somehow we can all agree on every single interpretation of every single text. You know, I think we're maturing in that. And I think that young people are interested in debating and understanding one another. And actually, it's a really rich text to kind of dive into. But I wonder whether part of what's going on is, you can actually find something that you're looking for in the text.
It's interesting that there is this new search, and people seem to be turning back to the Bible again. And even though it's encouraging to hear about this upturn in Bible sales and kind of engagement, at the same time, we do hear a lot about the fact biblical literacy, as you said earlier, is at an all-time low. So many young people coming to the Bible will have literally no clue kind of what's inside. And I suppose the question is, what do you lose as a whole culture, maybe, Andrew, when you stop just having that kind of familiarity with, I don't know, the story of the Good Samaritan, you know, some of the basic concepts of the Old and New Testament, the Ten Commandments. Well, should we move this plant off stage? Because it's having a moment in the spirit where it just wants to lie down at every opportunity. So we'll let it do that to the side. But sorry. This is the rest of the plant survive.
I mean, this one's standing tall.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, back to my question, which is, what do we lose when we don't have that kind of basic familiarity with the Bible story?
Well, I mean, that's the sort of negative question of the positive, isn't it? So I guess we lose what we gain, which is that, I mean, I think so much has been shown, even by Tom Holland and others, about just how much the West has been shaped by the biblical story, has shaped the Judeo-Christian scriptures, shaped the way we see the world. And as we see that disintegrating, yes, there's a quiet revival going on of people revisiting it, but often they're not the people who are policymakers. They're not the people in positions of power. It's happening maybe typically at a younger age. And I think we lose some of that Christian vision. And probably it's fair to say many of us have looked at some of the votes in Parliament recently that affect the sanctity of life and realized that actually it's not a given. It's not a given that life in the womb will be protected as sacred. It's not a given that the end of life will be preserved as sacred. These things are distinctly Christian. So you ask what we lose. Well, we lose a Christian vision for the sanctity of human life. I think we also see increasingly in the culture wars an atmosphere of hostility, of cancel, that lacks that sort of basic forgiveness. You know, the story of the Good Samaritan, ultimately, whether you read that story through on a macro scale of how nations should care for those who are struggling, or on a micro scale, how individuals should, gosh, that story has given a kind of impulse to our Western sensibilities that actually the strong should help the weak, and those who consider themselves God's people should love their enemies, you know, even if they are, you know, divided. I like the Jew and Samaritan story that Jesus told. And I think we are seeing some of the symptoms of a society that's lost that. There's not a lot of forgiveness out there if someone transgresses. There's not a lot of love for the enemy or for the other side, the person who's not in your cultural tribe. So that's, if you like, more on a political and a cultural scale. And then I guess the meaning crisis then touches down in much more personal tones, doesn't it? I just think one of the things we lose is that individuals no longer live their lives conscious that they're part of a larger story. And I think that's scary. Life is fragile. Life is vulnerable. The world is geopolitically and mental health-wise is vulnerable. And if you are not feeling, my life is attached, tethered to something immovably greater than myself, well, is that not an explanation in part for so much of the anxiety that we experience in our culture? And I think this is where the Bible just has this vital role to play. Just one little story that comes to mind as I'm saying this, as fresh as just this last weekend. I was speaking at another event, and after I'd finished speaking, the young man behind me, I got talking to him, and I asked him how he'd come to be here. He was with a friend. And he said, to cut a long story short, he said basically 2 weeks before this, he was sat on top of a quarry contemplating jumping off. He'd gone to the top of the quarry to end his life. And I asked him why, and he said all of the things, I suppose, that we're so concerned about. He's from a broken home. He felt no love there. He was from a sort of an atheist family. He felt no sense of meaning there. And his life he said, my life was not working. I had nothing. I've got no purpose. And as he was sitting on top of the quarry, he said, and then I heard him. And I said, what did you hear? And he said, I heard a voice. And he said, this is not how your story ends. So he walked down from the quarry. He went to W.H. Smith and bought a Bible. And he said, I started reading it. And I said, where did you start reading? And he just looked at me like I was stupid. He said, well, the first page. Because that's obvious, this is just another reminder, isn't it? It's not obvious that you would start anywhere else with the Bible. You start a book on the first page. So he starts in Genesis. And he said this little phrase. He said, things have just been getting a bit better ever since I started reading the Bible.
Wow.
And this was the first Christian event he'd ever been to. And I had the privilege of just kneeling down with him, and he gave his life to the Lord. And just felt, he said, I feel like this weight has lifted. And he's been texting me a bit since. But I tell that story, which actually I found really emotional. That moved me to tears, because I just thought that, come back to your question, what do we lose? We lose meaning, we lose hope, we lose purpose. And that takes people to some pretty dark places.
Yeah. Gosh, what amazing story though. Andy, a lot of people, if they have ever bumped into the Bible, it's often at school in one form or another. But at the same time, one almost feels like over the past several decades, like it's been harder and harder for the Bible to get a look in, maybe in education. What's your sense of what the situation is, and how can we, given that we do live in a very multicultural, often very secular culture, how can we help present the Bible in ways that work, if you like, in education? This is obviously something you do on a regular basis, think about these questions.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you think of how many million children there are in our schools encountering religion through RE teaching, that's a lot of children.
Yeah.
The Church of England schools that I helped to oversee with our colleagues in our diocese right around the country, there's 1 million children going back to school in Church of England schools in 2 weeks' time. So if you think about how many children there are in Church of England churches on a Monday, it's quite a lot more than children in Church of England churches on a Sunday. Do you see what I mean? Now, if you're a school leader, that's an encouraging statistic. If you're a church leader, that's a depressing statistic. But the reality is that 20% of children in England are in Church of England churches, Church of England schools, which is an incredible opportunity, so long as RE teaching is of a high quality, that is not simply knowledge transfer, which obviously the curriculum has pushed us a little bit in that way. Interesting, I had a meeting with one of the leading exam boards in the country just a few weeks ago, and they were saying, look, we want to actually make this subject much more inquiry-based than simply knowledge recall-based. Anybody done exams recently? Just raise your hand if you've done exams. And basically what you've been asked to do is retain a bunch of information and then spew it onto a paper piece of it. That's the aim of the game, right? And what happens in some subjects, including RE, is that squishes out the interesting part of that. Mm-hmm. Because if we all did a test tomorrow about which verses we could remember, or how we could, that would actually squish some of the most interesting parts of the text, some of the most interesting ways of exploring faith and asking questions. And so it's encouraging to see that is moving forward. However, there's a lurking challenge, and much like in what you were saying there, that unless there are sufficient people coming through who want to teach that, you've actually got a pretty major ticking time bomb problem there. Because actually it's a fascinating subject that you can engage any child from any background in, but you've got to have a quality teacher in front of that child. And so therefore we've got to make that subject an enticing thing to teach.
I can think of so many people actually who have said, often people who maybe came back to faith as adults, and the thing that they said was, well, it was always there in the background because there was this teacher or whatever who kind of helped me, way back. And if those teachers aren't there who are kind of, then you think, well, there won't be that ability to just draw on that later on in life. But you're also involved in a project, Andy, I'd love to hear a bit about it, which is, you mentioned sort of the fact that there's more children in Church of England schools on a Monday than in the churches themselves on a Sunday. But you're trying to kind of, blend those two a little bit more, aren't you? Trying to take church outside of the walls of the church building and do something in the schools as well.
Yeah, so I mean, the Church of England's been running schools in England for over 200 years. It's the oldest provider of free education in the world, actually. So when you look back in the history books, the Church of England started that work 1811. And if you were a child at that time, you could go to school if you had money. And if you didn't, you couldn't. And the church stepped in to do something about it. It's one of the great social reforms of the 19th century, actually. So that's our bigger story, actually. I'm part of that story at the moment. And we're looking at how in all of those Church of England school contexts, and in fact in most community school contexts, there's a relationship with a church or churches. It might in some cases be the Church of England church. I'm the head teacher, you're the vicar, and we work together and that's just normal. Or it might be a group of different flavor churches. But we're looking at how can you create worshiping communities in the schools or colleges, as opposed to trying to make the fairly difficult pitch to get young people to come to something that they don't know anything about in a place that is generally they don't feel they belong at a time when they're way too busy with families who have got, do you know what I mean? There's quite a lot of barriers to get over to get somebody to actually make that, whether it's a 5-minute walk down the road or a cup. Whereas in a school context, generally young people feel they belong. They feel valued, they feel loved, they feel known. And those are some of the things that help faith to form. They're the kind of roots or the soil in which faith can grow. So this pilot project that we've started last year, we planted 40 of these new worshiping communities in schools and colleges across the country. It's been amazing to see what's happened because they've been built on those partnerships, and those young people and their families and so on have been coming, have been enjoying learning about faith. It makes it feel normal because it's in a place you're used to being rather than a different kind of space. And we've seen some incredible things, young people coming to faith for the first time, people being baptized, confirmed, all kinds of things that you could just never quite have imagined when we started. And then we've just been awarded the funding to create another 40 of them in different locations. So there's a real potential. It's not just an idea; it's growing quickly. So many hundreds, probably over 1,000 young people involved in that just after that first year, which is amazing. And
is this happening? So this obviously necessarily happening on a Sunday. It's happening.
So it typically might be like on a Thursday after school. That's when we kind of would run it. It's not compulsory for the children. Obviously, you're not allowed to do that, of course. But where that partnership is strong and where the local church or churches are good with partnering with the school. We've also seen some amazing examples in community schools that are not Church of England schools or Catholic schools or any faith-based schools, where those worshiping communities are growing up in that context. And interestingly, we've also seen teachers who are in those schools have their sort of almost professional vocation kind of revitalized. So I visited one of these locations in Cornwall a few months ago, and I asked the head teacher to introduce me to the person who was running it. And she said, we've got an amazing person running it. I said, where did you appoint them from? Where did they come from? And they said, the PE department.
That's great.
And I was like, okay, great. And so we went down there and we met this lovely PE teacher. And she actually said, I was thinking of leaving teaching actually, until I saw an advert on the wall in a community sixth form college, nothing to do with church or anything like that, saying we're looking for somebody to take the responsibility for running a worshiping community in our college. And she stepped in. She's now doing part-time PE teaching, part-time running that worshiping community in the school. And she's so it could be a great way of revitalizing people's commitment to it. You know, it might even be teachers in this tent who think, oh, that sounds amazing. I'd love to kind of see that come alive. So it's a great opportunity. And it kind of is part of this kind of growing sense that if we can help church to be shaped in a way that makes sense to people, actually people are pretty interested in it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's my background as a school leader. My whole experience is, as long as you normalize talking about faith, young people are pretty interested to talk about it.
Yeah.
The minute you make it a kind of like, you must step over this line and go into this building and think this until we can actually talk about it, then you've got a problem. But, you know, you only have to look at the life of Jesus to see that's basically what he seemed to do. You know, there was no kind of like threshold before that relationship could emerge. Yeah.
Amazing. I've got one more question for you, Andrew, but just to remind you, we're going to go to questions in a moment. So if you've got a question, it could be about the Bible. It could be about, you know, helping young people to engage. It could be about, you know, how do I start something like you've just described there, Andy? Whatever it is, I'd love to see those hands in just a moment. But I mean, just as we bring this in, Andrew, what's been your experience hearing what Andy said about that openness that's actually there if you just sort of do things in a natural way? What sort of thing have you seen as you've gone around the country talking about the scriptures, opening it up for people, doing the Bible course and the Romans course now? Even Christians, I think, often don't actually get the Bible all that much, let alone people who kind of are only just discovering it for the first time. And there is a kind of a fear sometimes, I think, of I'm not clever enough. I'm not a scholar or whatever. What have you seen happen when you've kind of done what you do?
I think that's absolutely right. Really astute. One of the researchers I was talking with, she talks about a learning trauma. People have learning trauma. That is, they feel the trauma of that moment where you just feel stupid. And they want to avoid that at all costs, because none of us want to feel like that. That's not a nice feeling. Maybe people have had that in their educational experience. For reasons you've said, Andy, often education, all it's just measuring is how much you can cram in your head and regurgitate. That's not how the Bible works, is it? I mean, there is a certain base knowledge that's really helpful, foundational knowledge. But I think helping people over that learning trauma by realizing, I mean, there's various ways to do that. One of them is, I think, just to point out that even statistically, your life is going to improve if you give the Bible time. You know, the evidence is there in terms of church attendance, reading scripture. These are good things for you as a person. They're going to correlate with positive things, peace and well-being and so forth. So I think helping people realize, actually, this will touch down in my life. It's relevant. And then I think giving people, I mean, the Bible course, really what it's trying to do is say, you may not understand all of the little bits, but let me show you the big picture. And when you see the macro, here's the front box lid of the jigsaw puzzle. For a lot of people, the Bible just feels like someone's just thrown a big jigsaw puzzle on the floor and said, sort that. And so if you can show them the box and say, well, this is the big picture. This is the frame. It's all going to fit within this story. Then people are like, all right, I've got an anchor, I've got a place to start, I've got some framework on which to hang the smaller stories. And that's where I think the Bible then shelves into deeper levels, doesn't it? You know, it was one of the old Archbishop William Temple who said, I think that in the Bible, a toddler can paddle and an elephant can swim. And I've always loved that, the most brilliant academic will always be out of their depth in the deep end of the Bible. And yet the most new Christian, the person brand new to faith, like that gentleman I was mentioned, can wade in and still feel like it's accessible to them. So I think helping people see the big story, I think giving people some help on the tougher topics, I really do think that's important. I think a lot of people feel some of it's a navigation issue. I don't know how it all fits together. But then some of it is a kind of, I don't like this. Why is there so much violence in the Bible, whatever it might be? So giving people a bit of help on that. One of the stories that's really been on my heart a lot from scripture itself is in Acts 8, where Philip connects with the Ethiopian eunuch. And I love this story. I think it's archetypal for the moment we're in, because the Ethiopian eunuch is this, if you know the story, he's this curious seeker. He's got a passage of the Bible open in front of him as he travels home. He's tried to find meaning through, he's just been to the temple in Jerusalem, and clearly that didn't make much sense for him, or he didn't feel particularly that worked. So he's in the text of Scripture. Philip comes alongside him and says, do you understand what you're reading? And the Ethiopian says, well, how can I unless someone explains it to me? And I think there's a lot in that. But one of the things is there's more and more curious seekers coming down the road in our cultural moment. And they're not being difficult. They want the Bible to make sense. These are not hostile, difficult people, but they're stuck.
Yeah.
And they need a bit of help. And what they need is they need Phillips and Philippus to be able to sort of sit alongside and say, well, we can start there. That's a good question. So just lifting the lid, allowing people to say, I'm finding this difficult, and journeying with them, I think that goes a long way.
Yeah. And before you know it, here's some water. What's stopping me from being baptized?
Well, it's a beautiful story, isn't it? You know, I love so much about this story. The fact that Philip would dare to embrace someone so different to him, you know, that's such an amazing example for us. I think this man was a stranger to Philip. And I think what God is doing in our time is only going to get stranger. More and more people are going to be journeying to faith who are not like us, and they're not from our background. They don't think and talk in a Christianized way, but they're sincere and they want to find their way. And you're absolutely right. The story ends with that man going home, baptized. And Irenaeus, one of the early church fathers, tells us that he then went and told his people the gospel. And the church, the Coptic, the Orthodox Church in Ethiopia traces its story right back to that man.
That very story.
So, you know, amazing things can happen when people experience the Bible.
Well, thank you so much. We've got time for some questions from our live audience. This is the lovely thing about doing a live podcast, is we can do some live questions. So do send your hand up in the air if you would like to be found. I can see we've got someone over here, so go ahead.
Oh yeah, as an RE teacher.
Hey, great.
I think this is coming your way. Hopefully. I find it I completely with an inquiry-based curriculum. But there's a growing tension, particularly in the classroom, I find, between protected characteristics and also them being able to fully kind of proclaim the gospel, if you like, in a way that is there's no shame or there's no consequence as a result of doing that. And I'm just wondering if you've got any thoughts on that, because whilst being in a faith school myself, you obviously have to submit and follow those protected characteristics.
Do you want just to explain, Andy, what that means, protected characteristics and so on?
Yeah, I'd love to explain that. Yeah, so in legislation, there are a range of 9 protected characteristics, including gender and sexuality and disability, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what I think you're alluding to is that some faith teaching expresses a particular view around some of those characteristics. Probably the most spirit of our time divisive issues would be around human sexuality, around gender questioning, et cetera, and even as we've seen in a change of government that we've had just over a year ago, there's a range of different views in different political parties about different things around that. And you'll see actually some new gender questioning guidance coming out from Labour in the autumn term, which will be very helpful for helping navigate that. And in fact, we've produced some guidance during this year that is all around how to support those exact issues that you're talking about. It's called Flourishing for All. I don't know if you've come across that. If you're in a Church of England school, you perhaps have. If you haven't, it's probably well worth reading. One of the challenges that you're alluding to, though, is that if you are teaching in a state-funded school in this particular country, you're subject to that legislation, and so it becomes complex to express, particular personal beliefs in a way that imposes them on young people or indeed staff, etc., etc. It does get very complex for teachers who have those views to teach in that context. I'd love to chat with you more about how can kind of help with that. I think one of the things that it does open up, though, is the question of, do we all and ultimately have to agree on everything? And actually, these issues, although they're complex, and I'm not going to attempt to unpack all of them in this seminar, actually, they're issues that young people are interested to talk about. And whatever you think about those issues is a way of opening up bigger questions and meaning and identity with young people, and they're ready to talk about it, so long as you're ready to do that in a hospitable way, as opposed to a confrontational way, which says, well, I'm right, you're wrong, until you agree with me. You know, that's not really what this generation is interested in. So I think as long as we can kind of be dialogic about that and be hospitable, and again, I think what we see in the Bible is foretellings of Jesus's life from which we can learn a ton for this question. 4 authors writing from very different perspectives at very different times in history, largely through oral tradition. But what is one of the main things that they highlight again and again? Have more dinners and less arguments. Jesus seems to have a massive heart for conversation and relationship over agreement or disagreement. That seems to be a key thing there. And that doesn't mean we all have to think the same or whatever, but it does mean we need to make space to talk and to learn from one another. And young people really want to do that, as opposed to just receive knowledge to be remembered in a test.
Thank you. But sounds like that resource you've also made available could be really helpful in that case. Thank you so much, Andy. We'll go for another question. Can we see those hands again? And you can see there's a few people down here in the middle section.
Are there? Yeah. It's really exciting to see what's kind of happening. The Quiet Revival, etc. Exceptional. But how does the local church get involved in that and partner with that?
Should we go with Andrew first of all? When it comes to this uptick, how do we respond, I suppose, is the question. How does the local church kind of...
Yeah, I think it's a really important time for 2 things. One is we need to tool up ourselves because I think biblical literacy is actually quite low in the church, and we need to be ready to help people on their journey. This is the great thing about that story. Philip's able to come alongside this man and say, well, we can start with that passage. I'll help you. Are we ready to do that? So I think there's a bit of tooling up and equipping that the church needs, and that is urgent, actually. You know, we need to be able to not know it all. Nobody wants to sit next to a know-it-all. But we do need to be able to just give some helpful answers on the road, out in the big wide world. So I think there's an equipping and a tooling up, and the resources we mentioned are there to help with that. So I think that's one thing. And I think the other then is we can just afford to be a bit more confident and open about our faith. This is a good time, when it comes to the Bible, this is a good time. I mean, a lot of people seem to perceive the Bible now as a gift.
Yeah.
Not an affront or something to throw out. A gift. I was speaking to some military chaplains just a few weeks ago, and they were saying that they put out, as young soldiers are passing through first phase training, they always offer them a Bible. Normally they'd expect about half of them to take one. This time they put out 220 Bibles. There are 170 soldiers passing out, and all the Bibles went. And they were like,
one each.
Even if they all took one, where have the other 50 gone? So they start asking around, and some of the soldiers rather sheepishly like, oh, I'm really sorry, but I took one for my girlfriend as well. Is that okay? I took one for my nan. I think we just need to, reimagine the opportunity here. If the Bible's been perceived as a gift, not by everyone, I understand that, but by many, we could afford to be a bit more open about it and throw the front door a bit wider, and also be really ready to receive people in our Sunday settings who are coming in just saying, what is this all about? Having a pathway for them.
Brilliant. I'm actually co-hosting a conference in November called Responding to the Rebirth on the 22nd of November in London. Sadly, all the in-person tickets have sold out already, which is, I think, a testament to how much interest there is in this phenomenon. But there are live stream tickets, so do check that out, Responding to the Rebirth. Got room for one more, I think. So, Dan, I'll let you choose where we go for the final question. Thank you for the great questions that we've had so far.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Justin. Hey, Andrew, Andy. Can a culture be changed? And can our culture be changed?
Well, why don't we hear from both of you on this one? Andy, do you want to start us off?
Well, that's a big question. Yeah, I mean, it's changing every day, right? And there's huge forces at play in our nation and globally. You can see even over a year of political change, how much our own nation and the globe has changed. So yeah, of course it's changing. I think one of the things that we have got an opportunity to do is to impact that kind of change. So for example, if we're interested in connecting with young people, there's an opportunity to make that relevance through their education. You know, if you think about a regular 16 or 18-year-old who might have just finished their year 11 or year 13, just think how many hours of their life they've spent in those buildings. I mean, if you might be 16 or 18 and think, gosh, I'm glad to be walking out that door. There's plenty. But it's one of the most formational experiences that any of us ever have. These 200 days a year, 5 hours a day, it's 1,000 hours per year over 11 to 13 years. That's a huge amount of time, isn't it?
It is when you think about it.
So when you think about that and what is potentially happening in that space, not just encountering faith, but this broader, deeper, richer sense of what it might mean to flourish as a young person, then that's a great opportunity. And it's a great opportunity for the church of all flavors to step up. Because as encouraging as this research is, and as encouraging as this new moment seems to be, it does come in a context of the exact opposite over the last sort of 20 to 30 years. You know, I travel quite a lot around the world, and people perceive the UK to have declined into a very post-Christian kind of, and I think that's there. So it's the opportunity to connect through our schools and colleges is amazing if we set up the partnerships right. If we see that as a kind of mechanistic way to kind of get to young people or reach young people in a sort of transactional way, then that is destined to fail because young people will see through. So yeah, I think there's a great opportunity in that way.
Final thoughts on that as well. Can a culture be changed, Andrew Ollerton?
Yeah, well, I think if you read church history, of course the answer has to be yes, but not in a triumphalistic way and not in a way that will be uncontested. You know, I remember my old rugby playing days. You know, on a Friday you'd get run through some drills in a sort of non-contact way, and it's always very easy to catch the ball and show off your moves when there was no one charging at you. But when you actually have opposition, and I think what I would say is the moment that we're in, we're not saying that the Bible's sweeping the board, and no, there's all sorts of opposition and challenge, and I think we have to be ready for that. I think we have to be able to both hold out, Paul says, preach the word in season and out of season. The gospel is not more true now than it was when it seemed harder ground. It's not that the message of the risen Jesus is true, and that will change culture, that will transform people's lives. The good news of Jesus broke in the first century, and we're seeing more and more stories of that happening, but that will come at a price and with a contest, and I think we need to be prepared for that. I actually think the first century, it'll have even more to teach us in a funny way as we loop back to this sense that we're pioneering the Christian faith again in a culture that's largely lost touch with the story. And we see in the first century both God exercising great power to bring the gospel and then tremendous opposition and great cost. And I think we should expect the same. So I feel hopeful, but I think we need to avoid being triumphalistic as if it's just plain sailing from here. It's called the quiet revival for a reason. There's a gentle work of God going on, and we're praying that will increase, but we recognize there's some challenges there as well.
Well, thank you. And can we give a round of applause to Andy and Andrew? Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed today's show. Just 3 of many conversations that took place at the podcast stage of the Big Church Festival over 3 days. I really enjoyed being there for the first time myself and going along with my family and some friends. Saw some amazing music acts at the various stages too. Such a great atmosphere there too. A really beautiful venue. The festival takes place in the beautiful fields and surrounding grounds of Wiston House, a lovely stately home, and the owners make it available over the summer for these Christian festivals, and we were blessed with really good weather too. Again, links to all of the guests are with the show notes, as well as to the Big Church Festival. The podcast stage was co-hosted by myself and the Way UK podcast. Do check them out to hear some of the guests they spoke to, and thanks to the team there who captured the conversations on audio and video at the stage, and of course the lovely festival goers who came to listen and to ask their questions. And we've more of these conversations coming your way soon. I'll tell you who in just a moment. For now, thanks again for listening, and please do share today's episode with others who you think might benefit from it too. Posting it to your social media makes a big difference to reaching others, and of course leaving a rating and a review also helps people to discover us. And if you want to get in touch, do email me, feedback@think.faith. By the way, this podcast is also a book. I'll send you chapter 1 for free when you subscribe to my newsletter, and the first chapter of my new book, Why I'm Still a Christian. Again, you'll get both of those for free when you subscribe to my newsletter. And if you do enjoy this show, please consider becoming a monthly supporter. Silver supporters get early access to new episodes as well as bonus content, and gold supporters also get signed copies of both my books and a monthly catch-up call with me. It'll make a big difference for us being able to bring you a third season of this show if you can support. And you can do that from anywhere in the world via Patreon. If you're in the USA, there's also a way to do that tax efficiently via our partner, Defenders Media. All the links to support and give are with the show notes. Again, thank you for helping me to produce more of these shows. Coming up next time.
It just felt like in that moment, in that week in November, nearly 8 years ago, that your life had suddenly, as you knew it, had been shredded.
A very moving interview with TV presenter Simon Thomas on his journey with grief after suddenly losing his wife Gemma. That's coming your way as we bring you more conversations from the Big Church Festival. You can find out how faith helped Simon Thomas to put the pieces back together again, as well as some other brilliant guests who join me on the podcast stage. But you don't have to wait. You can listen to that show early, right now, in fact, when you support. As I've mentioned, do get on board if you can. The links are with the show info. The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God is a production of Think Faith in partnership with Genexus and the Jerusalem Trust. Editing assistance by Isaac Simmons. Thanks for listening. See you next time.
All right, listen up, nacho chips. Quiet down, crispy potatoes. This is the moment Velveeta's been preparing you for, and you're not about to crack under pressure. Today's the day to go all in on the drip. Velveeta's Heat and Eat Queso is the MVP of any game day spread, so stick by them, and you'll be golden. Now get out there and make delicious history. No tailgate party is complete without Velveeta.
Welcome to Sephora. I'm looking for a perfume that's not too perfumey. I got you.
Serum moisturizer or moisturizer serum.
Let's get into layering.
My concealer is making me look worse.
Sounds like the wrong shade. Let's get you matched.
There's only one store that really gets what you're going for. Get beauty from people who get beauty. Only at Sephora.
Hi, Let's get you a basket.
Don't be left in the dark. Find out about our latest shows, upcoming events, and recent articles by subscribing to my Think Faith newsletter. It'll arrive once a fortnight, and I'll even send you the first chapters of both my books, Why I'm Still a Christian and The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God, for free when you sign up. And if you want to support this show, you'll get early access to episodes and bonus content when you become a silver supporter. Gold level supporters also get signed copies of both those books and the chance for a monthly catch-up with me. Your support makes a huge difference. The links for the newsletter or to support are with the show info, or go to justinbrierley.com.